IB Nation, Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Final podcast before we do our sort of like our last show we always do before game is our keys to victory and our prediction show. And so I got to tell you, man, I am ready to go. Excited about what we got going on here today, Trev, and excited to talk about the different topics today. We're going to take a couple deep dives into some matchups, and we've talked a lot about the big picture stuff, the run game versus pass game and all these different things. And today we're going to kind of dive into more of a personnel matchup look. And so we're going to have 4 different segments today. The first segment, we're going to break down sort of the matchups that we think could matter the most to this game. And obviously, as Notre Dame fans and Notre Dame show, it's more so to a Notre Dame win, but not thriving in these matchups could lead to a Georgia win. Or if the Georgia players perform better in those matchups, it'll have an impact on Georgia winning, Notre Dame losing. Then we'll dive into the segment 2 will be the defensive matchups, the Notre Dame defense against the Georgia offense. And then finally, Trev, the last 2 segments are going to be more of here are 5 reasons why we believe Notre Dame is going to win this game. We both came up with our 5. I think 3 of them, Trev, we were pretty much had the same, and then 2 others that were a little bit different. So we'll do all those. And then the final piece is going to be, what are the 3 biggest concerns that could keep Notre Dame from winning this football game? And we'll break down those 2, and then it'll all kind of lead into tomorrow's show. Trevor and I were talking too, and we're very concerned about how much of a stressful day Wednesday is going to be, waiting for the Notre Dame game to start. And 8:45 kickoff. So we decided, you know what be a great way to pass the time on Wednesday morning is maybe around Trev, 11 a.m. We just do a mailbag until the games start. Not the Notre Dame game, but the 1 o'clock games. Now, you and I both know we could probably do a mailbag from 11 o'clock till the kickoff of the Notre Dame game. But no, until the 1 o'clock games start. So we're going to do a little special Notre Dame Irish Breakdown mailbag at 11 o'clock on Wednesday. That way, that 2 hours will fly by for all of us. You guys can get your questions in, and we can kind of help that rolling. And then, of course, 1 o'clock game start. If we still have a bunch of good questions, we may go a little bit beyond that as we're watching the 1 o'clock game. But I'm excited. And then, of course, by Wednesday, Trev, we'll know at least who one of the semifinal teams is going to be, because Boise State and Penn State kick off tomorrow night. So I'm excited about these next couple days. And, of course, we'll have a post-game show that night and upon further review and all that kind of good stuff. So, and then hopefully we'll be talking about, okay, what's next? We got Penn State or Boise State coming up. So that's going to be the next part of it. So I'm excited, Trev. I know you are too, man. This is going to be a fun show.
Yeah, man, I'm ready to dive into it. I'm too anxious. I really was hoping I was going to wake up today and it was going to be Wednesday, but it's not. You and I were also talking before the show. I don't know how it's been for anybody in the chat, but my days have been really messed up lately. I mean, maybe it's because Notre Dame's playoff game was a Friday, Christmas was a Wednesday, but I was driving around in the car yesterday. My wife and I were coming back from a family Christmas, and I was like, man, it's at least tomorrow's Saturday. And she's like, nope, it's a Monday. So I'm just ready to get back to the normal schedule, and I'm ready to watch Notre Dame take on Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, man.
Yep. Trev, this is obviously it's a big one for Notre Dame. For Georgia, it's kind of like, okay, we've been here before. We're going to keep being here, and this is what we do. For Notre Dame, it's your opportunity to say, hey, listen, no, we're on this stage now. We belong on the stage now. We're one of those teams now. And really, that's what's at stake for Notre Dame. And in order to thrive and win that type of football game, Trevor, you need your people, your players, to step up and play at a high level. And there's especially true in some of the matchups where either A, you have an advantage, or B, the other team has an advantage, and you have to kind of hold your water, or sometimes even win those matchups. And so those are the things that we're going to talk about. And we're going to kick things off, Trevor, with the offense, breaking down the Notre Dame offense against the Georgia defense. And, it's kind of funny. I made my list of matchups. You made your list. And then we got together and we're like, look, we're going to talk about all of them. We're not going to just talk about my 3 matchups. And then you have to share what you think about my 3 matchups. We're going to talk about the 3 matchups that we both believe. So there's a chance we could be talking about 6 different matchups. But you and I were pretty much on the same page on 2 of the 3. And the first one is a bit of a no-brainer, in my opinion, Trevor. This is a matchup that Notre Dame doesn't have to dominate, but they have to avoid being dominated. They just have to hold their own. And that is the matchup between Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner against the Georgia edge players. We're looking at Michael Williams, Chaz Chambliss, and Jalen Walker. And with Emil, for me, it's both phases of the game. It's run and pass game. Emil's been as steady of a player as Notre Dame has had all year, but he hasn't had a ton of dominant moments this season. And they don't need him to necessarily have a dominant moment, but they just need him to be physical at the point of attack, be effective in the run game. Don't get beat across your face a lot, because Georgia's going to run a lot of slants right across his face with their big guys, and they're going to then try to come off the edge in different ways, and they put a lot of stress on tackles. They need Emil to step up and play well. And on the other side, with Anthony Knapp, I'm not concerned about this matchup for Knapp in the run game. I'm concerned about this matchup for Knapp in the pass game. And one of the biggest things could really blow this game up, Trevor, and really my first two matchups address that. But if Riley Leonard if this is one of those games like Indiana was at times, like Louisville was at times, where Riley Leonard just has no time to throw the football, which makes the pass game kind of just not really a threat, that's going to be hard to do what you need to do to win this football game unless your defense just absolutely plays their best game of the season. It's going to be really hard. And so that's why I put in really both phases of the game to some degree, this matchup between the Notre Dame tackles and the Georgia edge players is going to be huge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we can talk all the live long day about, Riley has to be smart with his decisions and get the ball out on time. The receivers need to come off the line of scrimmage. The tight ends need to win their one-on-one battles. And all of that is true, right? I think we can all agree that that is kind of a common consensus of what we believe the offense needs to do to win this game. However, it all starts up front, right? It begins with the big guys up front holding their own. The way that I view this matchup is very similar to week one, and how we talked about how Anthony Knapp going up against Nick Scourton, an all Big Ten pass rusher that transferred into Texas A&M. He just has to hold his own. Nobody was expecting him to go in and look like Joe Alt and look like a first-round draft pick as a true freshman, right? But Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner are going to have their work cut out for him because they're going up against a dynamic edge rushing team in Georgia. I mean, Michael Williams is really athletic off the edge. I mean, he's 6'5", 265 coming off the edge. Chaz Chambliss is tied for the league or for the team's lead in sacks. And then obviously Jalen Walker's kind of their third down guy that comes in, and he has a knack for getting after the quarterback. So they're going to have to hold their own. Yeah, I'm not – the expectation is not, come out and look like the best moments of Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, because I think that's an unreasonable standard to hold these two first-year starters to, right? But if you can come in and hold your own, Riley Leonard can't be having those two guys be driven back into his lap in quick game.
Right.
Because part of the keys that we're going to talk a little bit about more tomorrow is getting bigger chunk plays down the field. That's not going to happen if Riley Leonard has a second and a half to throw the football.
Yep.
So those two guys along the edge are going to have a huge key into the offensive success. And I'm glad you included Emil Wagner in the run game as well, because I'm in the same boat as you. I'm not worried about Anthony Knapp in the run game. He's been proven that he can move people off the line of scrimmage. That 98-yard touchdown run that Jeremiah Love had against Indiana, he had the key block to seal that edge, and he could fit in the gap. But Emil Wagner is going to have to basically be who he has been all season and be that consistent player. Riley Leonard, during their media day in practice before they flew down to New Orleans, even mentioned Emil by name, saying he's kind of been the most consistent guy that we've had. There's been no shifting. He hasn't had to leave the game at any point in time. So he's just going to have to remain more of that. So I'm with you.
Yeah. And Emil hasn't had that really bad game that I think like every other lineman has had one of this year. Billy Strouth had one recently. I mean, we've seen Anthony Knapp have some really bad games, especially in pass pro. We've seen Rocco have some rough games. We've seen Coogan have some rough games. Not a lot of them. I mean, you don't run for 200 yards in 6 of your last 7 games if your offensive linemen are just constantly having bad games. But like everybody's had at least one this year. Emil had a game, and I'm trying to remember which one it was. It was one of the second half of the season games where I didn't think he played well, but it wasn't like he was a liability. And that needs to continue in this game. He just has to hold his own. That's going to be the big key. Just hold your own in this matchup. And if he can do that, then I think Notre Dame is going to be able to keep those edge players. Look, they're going to make their plays. They're going to have some really tough edge sets where they stop a run. They're going to have some pressures where they force Riley Leonard out of the pocket. They're probably going to get a sack or two in this game. It's probably going to happen. But, it's like, I think of the pressure that I believe it was Mikhail Kamara had just whooped Anthony Knapp on the edge. And Knapp got beat, but he recovered, and he just got hands on Kamara and just rode him just outside, and Riley climbs in the pocket and then lets loose with a strike on a 44-yard post route. Like, yeah, you got beat, but you held your water, you recovered, you kept your quarterback clean, right? This isn't even just about, okay, come off and stone him every single time. It's just don't let him get hits on the quarterback. Sometimes that means ride him where he wants to go and let Riley go do his thing. Pass pro is very similar to the run game, Trev, where, yeah, you need to be more firm in the pass game to not allow the pocket to collapse. But if you do get beat, keep a body on a body and let your quarterback do his thing. That's really the key. And hopefully they can do that and have some success in this game. Because my concern is getting beat off both sides. Williams with a power move off one side and either Walker or Chambliss with more of an athletic move off the other side. That's where you start getting a little bit concerned about where this thing is going to go.
Yeah, I think one thing that should be addressed is when you get to this level of game, right, and you get to this caliber of opponent, I think there's a lot of questions around what does good look like.
Mm-hmm.
You see a player get beat once and then automatically it's, well, they just had a horrible game. And it's, you know what I mean?
When it's the other way too. I saw somebody trying to advocate for how well Anthony Knapp played against Indiana, and the thing that they showed was the phenomenal block he had on the 98-yard touchdown run.
Right.
Like, well, I could show you about 7 or 8 pass rushes where he didn't look like you know what I mean? Like, you can't get wrapped up on that one play. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, good for me is just playing at a level of consistency, right? And what does that look like either way? When you're going up against NFL caliber guys on both sides of the football, each of their teams are going to get their own, right? But we start talking about how well or how poorly somebody performed based on the level of consistency that they did or did not play at. And so that's something like when we start talking about deep run playoff matchups, it's different than talking about what we need to see from Anthony Knapp versus Stanford, right? Like the expectation against Stanford, right, is like, hey, like for 95% of the plays, you are kind of expected to stonewall these guys. You're not allowing not only hits on the quarterback, you're not allowing hurries. But in games like this, it's, hey, stay engaged. If somebody beats you around the edge, Brian, to your point, ride them to the outside, give your quarterback time to step up in the pocket. Same thing in the run game. We've seen tight ends in the run game from time to time just kind of lose engagement with people, and they are free running to make the play at the end. So, I think it is worth highlighting what good looks like, because it's not just going to be this full 4-quarter dominant performance where it's like, I mean, good thing Anthony Knapp is only a true freshman because or else he'd be going to the league next year. It's not going to look like that. If it does, what's up?
This is going to be a long day for Georgia.
Yeah.
I mean, like, this is the thing. If this is a matchup that like our expectation for Notre Dame is just don't get whooped on the edge. You don't need to look like you said, Trevor. This doesn't need to look like you're playing Stanford. You're not. You're playing Georgia. They're older than the Notre Dame guys are. The Notre Dame players are a little undersized there. Athletically, they can handle. I'm not worried about them getting out athleted on the edge. I'm worried about them getting bullied on the edge. That's really my big concern, or them not handling the line games effectively, which is a big concern in this game. It's just hold your own. That's the key. Hold your own. When you're playing edge players this good, it's just hold your own. And that's going to be true on the other side of the ball as well. And we'll get into that here in a little bit also. Trev, my biggest concern when I think about, I've said that, I mean, this is a consistent theme for me, and this matchup really concerns me. I'm a big believer, and maybe this is the old quarterback in me, that when you get dominated up the middle, that is the biggest kryptonite to an offense. There's not a lot you can do. You can't run stretch away from it because the middle can just blow up the stretch as well. You can run outside of it, but if you're getting dominated by the 2 interior players or the interior player, if you're in a 3-down and 2 inside linebackers, well, then they can just have their safeties and their outside linebackers play the alleys because you're just getting your physically man-on-man whooped up the middle. That's going to be a big concern that I have in this game. And then on the flip side, if Notre Dame can win up the middle, that's where they're going to have a big day running the football. And the matchup that's most important to that, in my opinion, is Pat Coogan against Nazir Stackhouse. This is a huge one for me because Nazir Stackhouse is a 6'3", 320-pound kid. We saw Notre Dame struggle with Zeke Biggers. Now, Nazir Stackhouse is not quite as long, and I don't think he's quite as talented as Biggers, but it's not a huge drop off between the two. And Biggers was a big reason why Notre Dame had some trouble at times getting the run game going. Now, they still were able to break off a couple big runs. They ended up going for 168 yards in that game. And if they rush for 168 yards against Georgia, I'll feel Notre Dame has a pretty decent chance to win this football game. But what you have to prevent is getting dominated up the middle. And with Coogan, he's been the guy that when they've had issues getting driven back, it's usually Coogan. Where Schrouth and Rocco have issues is they'll get beat on twists and stunts where they don't come off the twist and pick it up. And that's a big concern I have because Georgia plays a lot of line games, more than I've seen from them in the past. They run a lot of twists and stunts. Now, in some ways, that can play into Notre Dame's hands because when you watch Georgia's opponents, I saw a video that said, Georgia, there's only been like Bama's the only team that really beat Georgia on inside zone. Well, I don't think that's necessarily accurate, number one. I've seen some other teams. Kentucky had some success with it. But they don't really play anybody that runs a ton of inside zone. I mean, Auburn runs a lot of the Hugh Freeze misdirection off tackle outside zone. A lot of teams don't run inside zone. There's a lot of teams run counters and wraps. And Texas isn't a team that just comes at you with a real physical inside zone. They're more of a finesse rushing attack. This is a different type of animal for Georgia, but it's also a different type of animal for Notre Dame as well. That's the interesting aspect of it. And when Notre Dame struggles with those line games, that's a problem. But the bigger concern for Georgia is if you're running those line games and Notre Dame picks them up, then those running backs are going to go do some damage, right? That's the counter to that. There is no counter to your centers just getting dominated and push back into the line of scrimmage. That's the big concern I have because now your guards need to help out on him, and that's when you start to see the linebacker run-throughs really create issues. So this is a matchup where if Pat Coogan, again, it's not about Pat Coogan does not need to dominate Nazir Stackhouse. Just do your job. Just hold your own. Just don't get dominated, right? And that includes pass game, getting driven right into Riley Leonard's lap, and that also includes run game. When you're coming off in the run game and you're running your inside zones, you've got to hold your own and get some movement there. And now there's some things I think Mike Denbrock could do to help that. We could maybe see some counter in this game. We could maybe see the outside zone that they ran effectively against Indiana. There was a breakdown video talking about how good Notre Dame, how that inside. And the funny thing is in that video, he's talking about, the inside zone. He's referring to the 98-yard touchdown run, and he calls it inside zone. That's not inside zone. That's Notre Dame's outside zone play. Because what a lot of people don't understand is Notre Dame's outside zone play is not a stretch. It is an off-tackle run. That is how they run their outside zone. And that was an outside zone play. So was the 20-yard run from Jadarian Price because I think there was some concern about can they move C.J. West off the ball, who was, 6'2", 317, really good football player for Indiana. Similar matchup here. And so that's where you got to say, hey, look, with Coogan, you've got to hold your own. You've got to hold your water, and then you've got to win a few reps. You don't got to win all of them. You just got to hold your own, and then a few times win some reps. And that's when Georgia has had some problems is when interior linemen just don't get driven back by the Georgia blockers because this group of Georgia interior players that includes Kristen Miller and the rest of that depth chart, they're big and physical kids, but they're not the playmakers that some of the other guys were. They're not quite as dominant as a Jordan Davis, a Jalen Carter, guys like that. And so it's more so, but when they've had trouble, it's when teams just kind of do exactly what we said, just hold your own inside and then let the backs work. And if they're able to do that, then I think they'll be able to have success running the football. There's no question about it. If they don't, then you're going to see Notre Dame give up some negatives. And that's kind of what started happening late in the second quarter, but into the third quarter against Indiana when Rocco went out is they started getting push in the run game. They started forcing early cuts. They can't let that happen against Georgia.
Yeah, for me on the interior, the biggest concern outside of the run game is pass protection because, like you said, maybe it's just the former position in me kind of speaking up, but pressure up the middle is tough to get anything done with. Gap escapes look different when you're getting pressure right up the middle. You can't step up into the pocket. You're forced to try to make a play along the outside, which plays right into Georgia's wheelhouse when you have guys like Jalen Walker and Michael Williams and Chaz Chambliss kind of coming at you from the outside and on the perimeter. So, I mean, protection up the middle is going to be vital because if not, Georgia won't have to send any additional pass rushers besides their 3 down linemen and one of Chaz Chambliss or Jalen Walker off the edge, right? And that's the thing that concerns me. If that front 3, front 4 start to get pressure on Riley Leonard and they don't have to bring any additional pressure, their linebackers are great, and where they live is in the run game. I don't think that they are world beaters when it comes to pass coverage. I just don't think that enough teams attack them in ways that they could be. But if you put them in a position where they don't have to rush and they can just kind of hang out and cover underneath, then that's going to be a real long day for Notre Dame's offense, because once they start bringing in additional pressures and throwing behind blitzes, that's what Alabama had a lot of success with. Their defensive line wasn't able to generate that much pressure against Ole Miss. And that was one of the reasons why they had a lot of offensive success there. Ole Miss let their skilled guys kind of go to work and do good things in the open field. So, yeah, pressure up the middle is something that just can't happen. I'm with you. Like, you got to hold your own, not asking anybody to play above a level that they haven't or aren't capable of playing to. But for me, it's all about consistency. Because Georgia is a team, we've been saying it for the last week and a half. Georgia is a team that can make you pay for your mistakes. And if you start having a game that starts to look a lot like this and not as much like this, it's going to be a long day. So protection up the middle is going to be key. Absolutely.
Here's my third one, Trevor. We're going to get into some skill now. Bo Collins against Dalen Everett. It's a big one. Bo Collins at times this season has been a good football player for Notre Dame. He's never been dominant, and they don't need him to be dominant in this game either. At times, he's been a good football player for Notre Dame, and at times, he's honestly been a liability. And for most of the season, he was a good, solid player, good, steady player for Notre Dame. And then late in the year, Trev, he started to become a little bit of a liability because he wasn't making plays anymore, and he was dropping balls. And in this game, from what I have seen in the games I've broken down, Georgia plays a lot of field boundary with their corners. They'll have Denver. I keep saying Denver Harris. Daniel Harris to the field, and then Dalen Everett to the boundary. When teams go twins, they'll go corners over a lot. At least they did against Texas, and I would anticipate them doing the same thing against Notre Dame. So they'll go corners over. And in a lot of those matchups, it's going to be Dalen Everett against Bo Collins. Bo's going to have some wins in this game. He's going to have some wins in this game. Does he need to go out there and have 6 catches for 100 yards? No, he doesn't. He needs to have 4 for 60, 5 for 65, 5 for 70, something like that. He's got to have those chain-moving plays. He's going to have to be able to work the middle of the field. He's going to have to win on some quick game, right? Some RPO glance routes. He's going to have to win on some in cuts, things that Notre Dame asked him to do. Bo has got to be on top of his game. They need him to be on top of his game if Notre Dame is going to be able to move the ball well enough to put up 20-plus points against this Georgia defense. And they can. They certainly can. But he's going to have to play well. That's going to be a big key. And then also in the run game, because they do have big, long corners that want to funnel everything back inside. But one thing that Bo has been pretty good at, even when he struggled in the pass game, he's been still pretty good as a run blocker. That needs to continue in this game as well, Trev. But if they can win some of those one-on-ones, win on some of those stop routes, win on some comebacks, win on some glance routes in the RPO game, win on a couple digs, and Bo has a 5-6 catch game with no big mistakes, I think that's going to make it a lot easier to move the football against Georgia. A lot easier. If Bo Collins gets dominated in a one-on-one matchup against Dalen Everett, or if he struggles, even if he doesn't get dominated, but he just doesn't catch the football, that's going to make it a lot easier for Georgia to roll their coverage to the tight ends and protect against the run game and things like that. If they know that they can just bring that boundary safety down in the alley all game long because Bo Collins isn't going to make them pay for it, that's going to make it a lot easier for Georgia to get the numbers in the box they need to slow down or shut down the Notre Dame run game. And so Bo Collins is going to have a huge role in this game. The better he plays, the better this offense will be. I mean, it's not that simple, but for him specifically, it kind of is. This is what you got brought here for. This is what you came here for, was to be on this stage, was to have this opportunity to show what kind of player you believe you are. Well, here it is. It's the biggest opportunity for you. And it's a great opportunity for Bo to kind of change the narrative a little bit on himself with Notre Dame fans. But more importantly, obviously, is it'll have a big impact on the game. This is a matchup that he's got to win, Trev. He's got to win, in my opinion, to have this success. And so, and you could even go into the other outside too. right? And I know you'll kind of talk a little bit about that before we get to your third one. But I think this is one where, especially Bo, because of how Notre Dame has run their offense, is going to have to be important in this game.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I need to see from Bo Collins is fighting for the football. That's been my biggest complaint out of him. I mean, if I'm just being 100% transparent, like, look, the drops are excessive, and I think we can all agree on that. But drops will happen. The level of consistency that they've been happening at, I haven't been happy with. But you look at a guy like Arian Smith. Arian Smith struggles with drops, but the counter to that is he's a big play threat, and he shows up in big games, and there's always some sort of counter. Bo Collins, he's not a burner by any means. He's not going to take the top off of any defense, but he's a 6'3" boundary possession receiver. And there's been multiple times this season where it doesn't feel like he's fighting for the football, and that's going to be my biggest thing, especially going up against good sized corners like what Georgia has. Right. And so for me, for Bo Collins, what I need to see is that fight for the football, the relentless pursuit to go up after the football, high point, do the things that, to your point, you were brought into South Bend to do. Right? Because right now, if there's one thing in Notre Dame's offense that I think that it is lacking overall, is that it's a pure boundary guy. That's a possession guy, go-to guy on third down, somebody that, is a for sure fire red zone target, and I think that's what's kind of missing from this offense right now. So Bo Collins has the opportunity to kind of right the ship on the biggest stage. I'm not expecting him to go out and do what, what Jordan Faison did against Indiana or have some insane stat line. But when he's given the opportunity, he needs to win those one-on-one matchups, similar to what he did against Texas A&M on that final drive, because really since that moment, we haven't seen a lot of that. His touchdown against Miami of Ohio, he blew by the corner. His touchdown against Navy, there was a bust in coverage. Nobody covered him. Riley saw it, and Bo finished the route. And it was a good play. But what you were brought in to do, I'd make the argument we've seen once, and it was in week 1. So now's your opportunity to go out and do it again at the biggest stage that you've played on in your career. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's going to be huge. And then we were talking about this before the show. It's going to be interesting to see who the other outside receiver is going to be, not from like a personnel standpoint, like nobody's hurt out there. It's just they rotate so many different guys that I don't know who it's going to be, but whoever's going against Daniel Harris has to win his matchups as well. Like Notre Dame's ability to push the ball down the field vertically is going to be a group effort. I'm not expecting it to just be one guy. Jordan Faison's coming off of one of, if not his best game in a Notre Dame uniform when you consider the magnitude of the game. I'm fairly confident that Georgia's going to know where number 6 is, wherever he's lining up on the field. Because right now, that's Notre Dame's most lethal threat in the passing game, if we're just being honest. So,
and not just because of that game,
right?
I mean, we saw it against Army.
Mm-hmm.
He gets that first big play of the game. We saw it against Navy, where in some of these bigger games, Notre Dame has tried to make sure that early in the game, Jordan Faison becomes a factor. Who's 5'2", going against Daniel Harris, who's 6'2" or 5'10". He's 5'10", going up against a corner who's, I believe, 6'2". So it's going to be length and strength against speed and quickness.
Yeah.
Interesting matchup.
Yeah. So it's like somebody else is going to have to step up. Like this is one of those games where multiple players are going to have to step up. It's one of those where your dudes have to go be dudes, and then dudes have to present themselves as dudes. Like if Notre Dame's going to make a run, I love what they've done so far this season. And I have confidence that Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love and Riley Leonard are going to continue to do what they're going to do, right? But somebody else has to join in on the party. Because at some point, especially when you start playing this level of defenses, starting off now with the Georgia Bulldogs, who've won 2 out of the last 3 national championships, at some point, somebody's going to just say, hey, you've done this to all these other teams. We refuse to let you beat us with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. You're going to have to find another way to do it. And so to me, I look at it, it's a group effort. I think in the wide receiver room, it starts with a Bo Collins, but then somebody else is going to have to step up. We've kind of been waiting for that Jaden Greathouse breakout game, kind of had it against Louisville. He's had other moments where he has a big play and then he just doesn't get targeted again for the rest of the game. For whatever reason, we've seen Jordan Faison in spurts be really good. We've seen moments where Chris Mitchell has, but somebody else is going to have to step up opposite of them, which also kind of leads into what my third point is, which is the tight ends. The tight ends at Notre Dame have not, like, the room as a whole has not really lived up to what some of the preseason speculation was. And some of that, it's a really injured room, right? Like Cooper Flanagan came out and he was kind of like tight end one until he got hurt. Mitchell Evans started against Texas A&M. That was his 9 months removed from tearing his ACL. It's kind of been a battle back for him. But Notre Dame needs to take advantage of these matchups against these Georgia linebackers in the run and in the pass game. Okay, starting off in the run game, and I've mentioned it over the last couple of weeks, the blocking from the tight end position has been very inconsistent. And when you have linebackers like Georgia's who can fly around, make plays, are known for coming fast downhill, blowing up run plays on the edge, the tight ends are going to have to stay engaged because for the most part, it's not like they're blocking the complete wrong guy. They're making contact with the right guy. They have a good initial pop, and then it's just they kind of just ride out the block. They disengage, and then they don't touch him afterwards. And so blocking from the tight end room is going to be important, especially with the task at hand, like we just talked about with the offensive line, right? Tight ends are going to have to do a good job of blocking around the line of scrimmage and then moving up to the linebackers because those linebackers for Georgia can be game wreckers if given the opportunity. But in the pass game specifically, not a lot of teams have tried to attack Georgia and their linebackers, which I think is interesting because what the numbers tell us, I looked at all of the linebackers, their coverage stats, not grades, but their stats of what they've given up on Pro Football Focus, right? And I went through and I looked, and C.J. Allen's kind of like their dude. Like, he's their dude in that linebacker room. And this season, he's given up 19 receptions on 28 targets. I mean, this is a guy that's given up a catch 67, close to 68% of the time, but he's only been targeted 28 times throughout the course of the entire season. Some of that is because some teams just really haven't had that much success having the ability to pass the ball downfield because their D-line gets home so much, but their linebackers give up plays in coverage. Smell Munden, he's given up 7 receptions on 12 targets. Jalen Walker's never really targeted that much because he's more used as a third down pass rusher. Then they have another guy that rotates in, Raylan Wilson, and he has given up 10 receptions on 14 targets. So more times than not, when you go after these linebackers in passing situations, they're going to give up receptions. Now, it's a little different because schematically, Georgia runs a lot of zone compared to what Notre Dame does running a lot of man.
Especially at the linebacker level. They'll play some man on the outside and match up zone on the inside. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's opportunities like that. We're talking a lot about who else needs to step up in the pass game. Yes, the wide receivers need to. But you have 3 tight ends that, in my opinion, are all mismatch nightmares. You have Mitchell Evans, who is a preseason, second-team All-American. You have Eli Raridan, who's 6'7" and a matchup nightmare for linebackers and safeties. And then you have Cooper Flanagan, who's 6'6" and has shown his ability to catch the football. So those 3 guys, I think, are going to help open up the pass game, especially if Georgia's getting pressure early, getting the ball into the hands of the tight ends. I mean, we're saying the same thing about Gunnar Stockton on the other side of the field. Georgia has a good room of tight ends. It's a young quarterback. Notre Dame's going to try to pressure him early, so they need to look for their tight ends. And I think Riley Leonard needs to do more of the same, but for different reasons. When Riley Leonard needs to get into a rhythm, they try to get the ball into the hands of 88 and 6. And I don't think that that's a mystery. And so getting Riley into a rhythm early, I think the tight ends are going to hold a huge part in that. And they're going to just add another element to this passing attack that is much needed, because as much as I would love to see Jeremiah Love rip off runs for 98, and I just don't know how much that's going to happen.
That's not happening against I mean, he can break some big ones, right? I mean, I broke this down in a run game article yesterday, Trev. It's actually, you can find it on the front page of boards at irishbreakdown.com. And of course, it's published at boards.irishbreakdown.com. But here's a crazy statistic for you that I had from yesterday's from this article, which is just wild. Notre Dame has 16 touchdown runs of 20 yards or more. That includes 7 of 50 yards or more. Love has 4 of those. Price has 2 of those, and Riley Leonard has 1 of those. Think about that. 16 rushing touchdowns of over 20 yards or more. That's not 16 plays of 20 yards or more. That's 16 scoring plays of 20 yards or more. And they've got one in almost every game. And so you feel like there's going to be a big play at some point in time. It's just probably not going to be like 98. It's, and you got to hope that it becomes a scoring play. That's the big thing. But it's going to be that efficiency part of it, though, right? To your point. And that's where they've got to play better. It's just the 3rd and 2's got to be moved. The 2nd and 6 has to become 3rd and 1, not 3rd and 5, because you whiff on a block on the edge. You know what's a really fascinating part about this matchup, Trevor? The 2 areas where I'm most concerned about Notre Dame stacking up against Georgia are the 2 areas that are traditionally Notre Dame's biggest strengths. Notre Dame gets called O-line U, and they get called tight end U. And those are the 2 areas that I'm most concerned about. Can they perform against Georgia? I'm not worried about quarterback, to be honest with you, to a degree. No. I'm not worried about running back at all. Receiver just kind of is what it is, right? I mean, we'll kind of see what that is. I'm concerned about that. But, these are the 2 areas where you have to be at your best. And the reality is the last 2 times they played Georgia, O-line U got whipped. 17 was a better performance than 19, and I still say the backs had some issues. I still say Josh Adams should have had about a 50-yard touchdown run in that game if he would have followed Mike McGlinchey on a G scheme play. I think maybe it was a buck sweep play, but he follows him outside, he might go. Didn't, and so I think these backs would have performed better behind that offensive line. But the reality is they were not able to go bully Georgia in 2017 with the best offensive line Notre Dame has had in 50 years. They were not able to beat Georgia up front. Notre Dame didn't even try to run the ball. Notre Dame looked like Texas this year in 2019 trying to run the ball on Georgia. Didn't even try. Now, part of that is they had one healthy running back on the roster at the time, and that was Tony Jones Jr. And that was really it. But the fact is they didn't win in the trenches. This game has to be one where the offensive line looks like, okay, this is why you're known as O-line U. Because your offensive line played well. Again, that's not going to look like this isn't going to look like USC versus Notre Dame 2017, where middle of the game, Nazir Stackhouse is no mossing it, giving us back to Quentin Nelson and just let Notre Dame go for 50 because he just don't want to get hit in the face anymore. That won't happen in this game. I don't care how hard you hit them. This Georgia team, we've said it a million times, Trevor, in this last 2 weeks. This team's not going to quit. I mean, if Notre Dame jumps up on Georgia 28-0 at halftime, Georgia's going to come out in the second half and be like, all right, here we come. Get ready for us. Here we come.
Yeah, new ball game.
Right? They're not going to quit. Mm-hmm. But it's going to have to be 60 minutes of do your job, do your job, do your job, do your job, do your job. It's not dominate. It's just do your job. And as we've seen all year, if the tight ends just do their job, just, run with good, come off the line with urgency, catch the balls that are thrown to you. If you think you're the number 2 target, then still run like you're the number 1 target because you never know the ball may still come your way. Do your job on the edge. You just got to get a body on that guy. Don't get beat across your face. Handle the twists. Handle the stunts. Just don't get dominated. If they just play good football and O-line U and tight end U lives up to expectations, then Notre Dame's going to win this football game. But that did not happen in 2017 and 2019. Now, in 2019, they looked like tight end U because Cole Kmet could not be guarded by Georgia.
Correct.
Right? But the offensive line did not do what they needed to do. In 17, neither of those groups played well. That's got to change more than anything, Trevor, in this game if Notre Dame is going to win. And that's what a lot of our matchup stuff reflects, is that right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it best. Do your job, execute. I'm not asking anybody to go out and perform like they're a day 1 top 10 NFL draft pick. Go out and do your job and perform at the highest and do the things that got you to this point. And so luckily I don't really believe that this is a team that the stage is going to be too big for this team. I genuinely don't believe that, but those 2 position groups, O-line U, tight end U, the things that Notre Dame has been built on, they have to perform at the highest level that they have this season. And if they do that, I think it's going to be a good day for the Notre Dame offense.
Yep. So, Trev, that's going to do it for our offensive breakdown. And next we're going to go to the defense and break down that matchup, which is also going to be very interesting. But before we do, folks, do us a favor. Y'all see that little thumbs up right below you while you're just kind of hanging out watching the show? Go ahead and hit that like button for us. We would appreciate that. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You have your notification bells on. And, of course, share the show. Not only physically hit the share button and share it with your followers, but also tell your friends and family about what we've got going on here at Irish Breakdown. And for you Georgia fans that are in the chat, we've had some people show up. Ohio State fans showed up for the 2022 game, and they've hung around. So if you guys like people to talk ball, you're more than welcome to hang around past this game. And some of them have been pretty good contributors. Some of them aren't allowed to post here anymore because they don't know how to act like grown-ups. But we all have those, right? Every fan base, including Notre Dame, has some of those people. So we appreciate y'all. But you guys go ahead and hit that like button for us as well. So, Trev, let's talk about this matchup between the Notre Dame defense and the Notre Dame offense, or excuse me, the Georgia offense. And from a personnel standpoint, because we've talked a lot about the big picture stuff, the run game battle against each other. And in that run game breakdown I wrote today, I said, look, everything about this matchup favors Notre Dame. On paper, it favors Notre Dame. Notre Dame has elite skill at running back. They've got a quarterback that's a matchup nightmare. Georgia has played 3 offenses that rank in the top 40 in rushing offense. That's it, 3 of them. Those 3 teams averaged 193 yards rushing against Georgia and almost 5 yards a carry. None of them are as good as Notre Dame's. Now, Tennessee ranks 9th, but Tennessee also averages like a full yard plus below yards per attempt than Notre Dame because that's just kind of what they do, and they've had plenty of their struggles as well. And you start feeling really good about it, and you say, boy, man, but then it comes down to line play. I think kind of the same thing is true on the other side of the ball, where you look at it on paper, this is not a great vintage Georgia offense. It's not. They don't rank super high in scoring. They pass for a lot of yards, but they don't exactly, play with great efficiency on defense. You know what I mean? Like, there's just a lot of things like rush defense this year, we're talking about the offense, but the rushing offense this year has been one where they average I'm just worried about them running the ball down Notre Dame's throat. And I'm like, you guys know they've only rushed for like 129 yards a game, right? Yeah, but did you see what they did to Texas? Yeah, I did. You know they only rushed for like 140 yards against Texas in that game, right? I mean, folks, like this is a team that has its own issues, that from a defensive standpoint, pass or offensive standpoint, from a pass game standpoint, they rank 11th in yards per game, but they're 80th in yards per completion. They're 104th in interceptions. They're only 30th in pass efficiency. And you look at their scoring offense, 29th, they're 45th in offense, they're 43rd in defense. I mean, there's a lot of things that make you think on paper this should be a Notre Dame route. But then you start diving into the personnel. And you start saying, okay, for one, you have to factor in the fact that Georgia played a very, very challenging schedule this year, which is going to naturally drag your numbers down. Because, rushing for 165 yards against some teams is like rushing for 230 against others, right? I mean, you have to figure that in. And as I've said, Trev, before, football is not a game that's played based on statistical matchups. It's based on personnel and schematic matchups. And that's where this game gets very interesting because the on-paper matchup, again, here favors Notre Dame convincingly. I mean, Georgia has the number 98th ranked rushing offense in the country. Notre Dame has the number 39 ranked rush defense in the country. And when you look at what Notre Dame has done against non-option teams, they're in the top 20. The Georgia Tech team that ran all over Notre Dame couldn't even get to 70 against Notre Dame, right? I mean, you look at the pass offense. Georgia ranks 11th in yards, 39th in yards per attempt, 80th in yards for completion, 104th in interceptions, 30th in pass efficiency, 51st in sacks allowed. Notre Dame ranks 4th in pass defense, 2nd in yards per attempt, number 1 in completion percentage allowed, 8th in touchdowns allowed, 4th with most interceptions. They have the number 1 pass efficiency defense in the country. They rank 16th by only allowing 10 plays of 30 yards or more, and they rank 33rd in the country in sacks. Notre Dame significantly outduels Georgia there. Scoring, Georgia ranks 29th in scoring, 45th in defense, 43rd in yards per play, 63rd in third down offense. Notre Dame ranks 3rd in points, 8th in yards, 5th in yards per play, 9th in red zone defense, and 7th in third down defense. Georgia ranks 70th in the country in turnovers. Notre Dame ranks number 1 in the turnover defense. And yet I look at all that and I basically do this. Because it doesn't matter when you get into a game like this, Trev. It doesn't matter because now it's about the personnel matchups. Georgia does match up well against Notre Dame in a lot of areas, where you got to throw some of that out the window. And it comes down to whose dudes step up and play like dudes in this game. When I watched Georgia and Alabama play in the SEC title game in 2022, it was the Bama players that stepped up and played like dudes. When I watched the rematch in the title game, it was the Georgia dudes that stepped up. Same teams, same scheme, same on-paper matchup as we saw in the SEC title game, but in each game, it was whose dudes step up and play the best football. That's what it comes down to. And so that's why I say the on-paper stuff is only going to take you so far. Now it's about the dudes got to step up and be dudes. And that's what this breakdown is going to be about, Trev, for the Notre Dame defense is, yes, Georgia outweighs you by, 30 pounds on their offensive line compared to your defensive line. We get it. Georgia has speed at receiver. Absolutely do. Georgia has talent at running back. Yes, that is beyond 129 yards a game. Their offensive line has dealt with injuries all year. Now, I'm less sympathetic to that pushback from Georgia fans about the offense. I'm like, no. This is not the team you want to be talking to about offensive line injuries slowing down your run game. Because Notre Dame has played 6 different offensive line combos this year. Has not had a single game with their expected starting offensive line, and only had 3 games with even their post-Charles Jagusah injury expected offensive line. So I don't want to hear that. But it is true. This is the healthiest their offensive line is going to have been in a long time. Nate Frazier's a stud talent. Trevor Etienne's a talented player. Gunnar Stockton is going to add a different element to the run game. So all of this stuff comes down to whose players are going to step up and play the best, who executes the best, who plays with the most consistency, but then also, Trev, who wins some of these matchups. And these 3 matchups, to me, are going to be huge. And I know you've got 3 that you like as well. 2 of them were on the same page. The last one were a little bit different, but they're both important. So we're going to dive into the one that you and I thought was the number 1 most important matchup of this game, and that is Howard Cross against the Georgia interior defenders. Now, look, Gabriel Rubio is going to be important. Donovan Heinisch is going to be important. But here's the deal. When Howard Cross went down, Riley Mills said, "I got you, dog." And he went out and dominated. Right? When Notre Dame's defensive line needed somebody to step up and be that dude in the middle of the season, Riley Mills did it. Now Riley Mills is out. Howard Cross has to do for the Notre Dame defense with Mills out what Mills did for the Notre Dame defense when Howard Cross went out, which is, I'm going to pick up the slack. This is a kid who's a second-team preseason All-American. When Howard Cross is on top of his game, he is a dog. There's no better game for him to prove that than this. He could be the number 1 game wrecker for Notre Dame, or he could kind of look like he did a little bit again in some of these games when he has been 100% and Georgia pushes him around, because that's a big concern I have. But if he can be the dominant player we have seen him from a lot over the last 2 years, then I think Georgia's going to have a much tougher time running the football. And if Georgia can't run the football, I don't think they can score enough to win this football game.
Absolutely. I mean, look, Howard Cross came back after getting some NFL draft buzz. You come back to Notre Dame and you come back to your school 4 games and opportunities like this, right? I respect IU as an opponent. They were a good football team that deserved to be in the playoffs. Howard Cross didn't come back to Notre Dame to beat Indiana, right? Howard Cross didn't come back to Notre Dame to beat Texas A&M in week 1. He didn't come back to Notre Dame to get his revenge on Louisville on September 28th, and then he could just chalk it up to saying, "Hey, good season, fellas."
It was part of it, but it was a step.
Yeah.
It was a step.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you watched Howard Cross stand there on the sideline of that game last year, watching Georgia celebrate while the rest of his teammates were in the locker room, you knew, okay, all right, he's on something. But your point, Trev, it wasn't that 5th game. All right, we're 4-1. I dominated Louisville. Have fun rest of the year, fellas. I'm out.
Right. And so now, Brian, to your point, he has the opportunity to come back and show why he came back to Notre Dame. Yeah, he's seen a lot of teams. Howard Cross has been a part of Notre Dame's program for what, 5 years, 6 years? Yeah.
6.
Yeah.
He's a 6th-year senior.
So he's been a part of this program for a really long time. And this is why you come back. And now it can be highlighted. I never want to make light out of Riley Mills getting hurt. Like, it's a tough loss and it's difficult, but now it's moments like this. We've talked all the time in playoffs about, the guy that steps up, whether it be due to an injury or whether it be due to, just from a matchup perspective, they just need somebody else that they're not thinking of to step up. Howard Cross is going to have to be that guy. And the thing that I love about this storyline is the on paper odds are stacked against them. You're going up against an interior that's all over 300 pounds, and their smallest person is their center at 6'3".
They averaged 316 across the board.
Exactly. And Howard Cross is what, 6'1", 288?
Sure.
Let's
go with that.
Yeah.
Sure.
On paper, it says he's
Sure.
6'1", 288. Maybe with the helmet and shoulder pads on, but who knows? But what better of a narrative would it be with all these storylines coming out about, Georgia's size and physicality and their strength, and they can dominate teams up front. The guy that wrecks their offensive game plan is 6'1", 288 with cleats, helmet, and shoulder pads on. So these are the opportunities that you hear stories about guys stepping up in the playoffs. Everybody's going to talk about Xavier Watts, and everybody's going to talk about Christian Gray and Leonard Moore and all these other guys. Like Notre Dame has a guy on rushing off the edge. It's a true freshman, and he's 6'7". But the guy that can come in and have the number one impact on this game is as tall as I am. You know what I'm saying? So it's those narratives that you love to hear. And not only is it, I'm not trying to paint this like it's some Rudy thing where he, nobody's expecting. Howard Cross at times has shown to be the best defensive lineman in that group, right? So it's not like this is some nobody bum that everybody's expecting to come in and be Superman.
Right. This converted walk-on that's become their best player. No, it's not. This is a kid who's a 4-star recruit. His dad played in the NFL, played at Bama, by the way. But yeah, this is a kid with talent. He's just small. And again, this is not the ideal matchup for a guy like him on paper because of their size. But he needs to show that I don't really care. If it was all about on paper, I wouldn't be at Notre Dame. I'd be playing at, Navy or East Carolina or something like that if it was about the on paper stuff.
Yep.
It wouldn't be a 3-year starter at Notre Dame and a second-team All-American and all those other types of things. 100% correct.
Absolutely, man. I mean, it's going to come down to what can he generate in the pass rush. Gunnar Stockton is a first-time starter, and he's going to need to be pressured. And when Notre Dame's defensive line is playing at its best, well, similar to what we talked about on the offensive side, they get a lot of pressure up the middle, right? And Howard Cross is going to be leading that charge, especially with Riley Mills out. And then in the defensive run game, again, I'm not expecting Howard Cross to be able to take on these blocks from guys that are 6'6", 6'5", 320, averaging 316 across the board. But it's one of you just do your job. Do your job, hold your own, do what you can to penetrate into the backfield and blow those plays up early. When you get hands on Frazier and ETN, bring them down or hold them up and let other hats rally to the football. Just go in and do your job. Because I think if Notre Dame's defense has success, we can draw it back to number 56 having the best game of his season, right? So it's going to be huge, man. Howard Cross is going to be massive.
I thought he did it because Indiana had a pretty big offensive line as well, which we talked about. I thought he was not the impact player that I hoped he would be, especially against the pass against Indiana, because it looked like he still was kind of coming back. He didn't have the same level of juice, and we're going to find out if that's back in this next matchup. But the one thing I did feel, Trevor, is he did a really nice job with gap discipline in that game. Really nice job to fight and keep gap discipline and not get driven off and not getting driven out of his gap. That's going to be a big part of this game. No question about it. No question about it. There's another one, Trev, that's important too, and this is a polar opposite matchup. Georgia's got several good receivers that you got to worry about in this game, right? I mean, obviously Dylan Bell at times has been their best receiver this year. I think he probably would have led him in all categories if it wasn't for him being a little bit banged up. He should be healthy in this game. Landon Humphreys is a good football player. They got several good pass catchers, really good tight ends, which I know you're going to talk about here in a few. But the guy that concerns me the most is their most inconsistent player, but also their most explosive player, and that's Arian Smith. Led their team in receptions this year, or in receiving yards this year. He's a dynamic athlete, incredibly fast. He's the kind of guy that you can shut him down 70. And that's something you got to be concerned about. He's a guy that even though he's only around 16 yards per catch this year, he's been over 20 or around 20 for most of his career. And if he caught the ball better this season, he'd have even way better numbers. You can't assume he's going to drop the ball this game. Can't assume that. You have to assume that this is a kid that's played on this big stage a lot. He's going to be at his best in this game. You have to prepare for that in every instance. The Notre Dame corners, Leonard Moore and Christian Gray, are going to have to hold their water overall, but especially this matchup, because Georgia will throw at him. They will try to throw quick game to him to get him in space with a catch and run. They're going to screen the ball to him, and they're going to take their shots down the field. You've got to be there and be in position and not let him wreck the game. We talked about game wreckers in the last show we did last week, right? You and Vince talked about the defensive game wreckers. You and I talked about the offensive game wreckers for Notre Dame. Arian Smith is that guy that, if you're looking at it from a Georgia standpoint, is a big-time potential game wrecker. If he's on his game, he could all of a sudden, like in 3 plays, just completely wipe away all the good things you're doing as a defense. They cannot allow him to be that player in this game. That's the biggest concern. That's the biggest I think Georgia could maybe move the ball 20, 30-yard gain here. He's the guy that can go 50, 60. Like that's the legit concern I have in this corner room that at times has been brilliant and at times has been vulnerable to a player like him. They've got to be on top of their game, Trev. Have to be on top of their game.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame hasn't faced a whole lot of wide receivers that can take the top off of a defense the way that Arian Smith can. And I've been saying it for the last week and a half. This dude can fly. Now, there's been all these videos coming out about how fast Leonard Moore is, and I wholeheartedly believe it. Been a lot of talk about how fast Christian Gray is, and he was a track athlete in high school, and I believe that all those things are true. But, translating it into like football speed, some things can hit a little bit different. And I fully believe that's what Arian Smith is. I mean, he's not a guy that like poses a like physical intimidating factor like a Ja'Cory Brooks or like a Malachi Field, some guy that's just really big, tall, big frame. But what he lacks in size, like I said, he makes up for in speed. I mean, Arian Smith is only 6 foot, $185. Now, Notre Dame has faced plenty of those this season, but not any that have the level of speed that he
Rocket
does.
was only 5'10", $180.
Yeah.
Will Fuller was only 6 foot, $180. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like,
Right.
to your point.
No, man, Arian Smith can absolutely move, and it's one of those where they will take their shots, especially if they get the run game set up. If you allow Gunnar Stockton to take a play-action shot over top to Arian Smith, that's going to be they give him opportunities. They will give him opportunities. And so that I'm with you. Both corners are going to have to play fundamentally sound. And as weird as it is to say, I'm more interested to see that matchup from Christian Gray's perspective than Leonard Moore's. If I'm being honest, I mean, Leonard Moore, the last 2 games have been targeted 17 times and has given up 2 receptions. Christian Gray has struggled this season. I think he's catching a little bit of unnecessary flack for the touchdown that he gave up late to Indiana. That was just a gorgeous back shoulder throw. And look, there's not a whole lot of defense you can play there's not a lot of defense for a perfect pass.
Trev, if he didn't play the way he did against USC, people are evaluating the Indiana performance very differently.
Yeah.
Very differently.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, Christian Gray is still a heck of a corner, and he's going to have to continue kind of building up his reputation in this game, and there's no better way to do it against Arian Smith. But he is somebody that I'm going to have my eye out for, because there have been things from a technicality standpoint that Christian Gray's been a little sloppy with over the last 2 games, more so against USC. And I think for me, a lot of the questions got put to rest against Indiana of like, okay, were you really just tired and really just, long season, a lot of travel, or was this is this regression? And that question got answered for me against Indiana. It really did. But with that being said, there were still things from a technicality standpoint that he was doing, reaching, grabbing, he was out of position, he wasn't reading things properly against USC, that Arian Smith will absolutely hurt you on, because he's somebody that you're not catching up to. You know what I mean? Like, you're not, if he gets a couple steps on you, he's gone. And so that's going to be my biggest concern. Leonard Moore, to be honest with you, dude, just keep doing what you're doing. Honestly, like I can't ask you to do more than 2 receptions off of 17 targets, but Leonard Moore, continue to play how you have been. And for Christian Gray, do what you did against Indiana. Honestly, I mean, that was a good game. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. But like I said, the one thing is there's a lot of matchups this season where you can look back and say Notre Dame has faced a similar team. This position group has faced similar players. I don't know if they've faced a guy that can take the top off of a defense like this. So it's going to be an interesting one, man.
So Trevor, my third matchup is it's one that probably is my biggest concern in the game. Notre Dame's safeties have been elite in run defense this season, especially Don Schuler. Xavier Watts, for the most part, has been really good in coverage. But if there's a vulnerability that I thought that this team could have, is if they play a team with a really good pass-catching tight end. And they really haven't done that for most of the season. Now, a couple of the teams that do have good pass-catching tight ends, they did a good job against. Texas A&M, they, for the most part, kept their tight ends in check. They did a good job keeping the Louisville tight ends from really making a lot of plays, but they haven't faced anything like this group when it comes to the tight end. Just they've got three guys that could start for most of the teams that Notre Dame played this year. When you look at Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky, and then, of course, Ben Urasek, who has a 49-yard touchdown pass against Notre Dame when he was at Stanford back in 2021 before all the injuries kind of started to derail his career a little bit. He's their third tight end in this depth chart. If I'm Georgia, obviously you're going to run the ball. You're going to try to get the ball to Arian Smith. You want Dylan Bell to be your possession guy. But when this team has gotten in trouble this year, they've oftentimes turned to the tight ends. I got to think with 3 weeks to prepare, they're going to look at this and say, those safeties are impact dudes. We got to do something to keep them occupied. And one way to occupy them and go at them and take advantage of their aggressiveness is to try to get our tight ends involved in the game. That's what I'm doing if I'm Georgia, is I'm going to make a Don Schuler and I'm going to make Xavier Watts, who are both 6 feet tall, have to defend our tight ends. That's what I'm going to do. And now for Notre Dame's standpoint, that puts a lot on them to say, you've got to limit the effectiveness. Because if the tight ends can't take over, that Tennessee game looks a whole lot different in the second half. Whole lot different in the second half. And they were able to do that. And, of course, their run defense also started to finally figure some things out against Dylan Sampson. But that's a big key for me, Trevor, is you got to make sure these tight ends – and my concern is, are they going to catch 8 balls for 120 yards? No, I don't think that. But 2 or 3 big plays, some really crucial 3rd and 8 conversions, like that's a concern that I have. Also matched up, and I could probably throw Rod Hurd in there as well when he's in the game. If I'm Georgia too, when I see number 2 in the game, I'm going at him and throwing game with my slot receivers and my tight ends. Flat out what I'm doing. So the Notre Dame safeties against the Georgia tight ends is going to be huge for me in this matchup, Trevor. And it's another one of those ones where it's like you just got to make sure they don't have those great neutralizers. That's my concern in this game. I think Notre Dame – on 75% of the snaps, I'm confident the Notre Dame defense is going to shut down the Georgia offense. But what happens on those other 25? Can Notre Dame win more of those battles, or does Georgia win those? Because if Georgia wins those, they're going to tend to be bigger plays. 25-yard seam throw to your tight end. You don't cover Lucky on a play action over route. You come down thinking I got to get to the quarterback, and he throws it over my head for a 20, 25-yard gain. We've seen Notre Dame be vulnerable to that at times. I remember the Purdue game. If it's not for penalty, that's one thing that would have got Purdue not rolling, but would have given Purdue the ball near midfield in a game they were going to get blown out anyway. But the point is they've been vulnerable to that at times. This is a matchup that I feel like Notre Dame has to thrive in big time. And then also, if I'm Georgia, I'm looking at my first-time starting quarterback who has – thrown 30-some career passes and is playing on a stage he's never played on before. And I'm going to say, I am not going to ask that kid to throw a million deep shots. I'm not going to ask that kid to, read 1, 2, 3, 4 in my pass game. I'm going to give this kid some quick 1, 2 reads. And a big part of that's going to be getting the tight ends going. We've said it a million times, Trev. Best way to get Riley Leonard going is to get the tight ends rolling early in the game. When he's struggling, we're like, dude, go to the tight ends, go to the tight ends. Same thing's going to be true here, right? You want to protect the young quarterback, get your tight ends involved early in the game. That's going to be a big, big key for Notre Dame in this game. And you're facing a kid, like I said, Trev, that's got 1951 career passes, 2 career touchdown passes, 2 career interceptions. All right, you've got to make him go through his progressions. And if you can take the tight ends out, I think you're going to force him to go to the number 2 and number 3 reads a lot. and that's going to have a big impact. That's when now the pass rush starts to impact the game and those type of things. So I think this safety matchup is really, really big for Notre Dame.
Yeah, their tight ends post a really big threat in situational football, right? Third down, that's kind of their go-to target. When they're pinned back deep, they look to get Lawson Lucky and Oscar Delp involved in the pass game because they're kind of that all reliable for the offense, and down in the red zone, big bodies to throw to. So, no, I'm with you. Safeties and linebackers alike are going to have to be prepared for that matchup, right? Because I don't think that they're going to go and put up Brock Bowers numbers, right? They're just not that style of player, but where they can be really good and really efficient is situational football. In the red zone, on third down, pin back in your territory, whatever that is, because Notre Dame prides themselves on winning that situational football matchup. It's a big reason why they're on an 11-game win streak right now. But you have players that can break that tendency, and Georgia has 3 of them, and they're at the tight end position. You know what I mean? So that's going to be big because we talked about the size mismatch of Notre Dame's tight ends being 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". Same thing. Same exact thing for the Georgia tight ends. They're going up against linebackers who are, 6'2", 6'3", somewhere in that range. And they're going up against 2 safeties that are both 6 feet tall. So it's going to be mismatches, and the safeties are going to have to win them. Now,
I know your third is kind of one that I feel ties into all these others, right? Like if they perform well in some of these other areas where they do a good job of keeping Arian Smith down and they do a good job keeping the safeties down and Howard Cross has a good game, this third matchup for you could be the thing that this group then is able to kind of take over and make an impact. Or if this group struggles, it can negate some of those positives. And I thought that's going to be an interesting part of it, Trev. So dive into your final piece here.
Yeah, man. I mean, one of the reasons why this was my third big matchup is because it's kind of that position where we've been waiting for that performance all season. It was the one that due to injuries, out of all of them, you had the injury to Ben Morrison and that was tough, but Leonard Moore was able to step up in a big way. And now you have the injury to Howard Cross or to Riley Mills, but you still have Howard Cross in there to help kind of fill, and you have a bigger body in Gabe Rubio to step up. You could make the argument that the one position that has yet to step up and have that I'm here moment are the Notre Dame edge rushers. And that's going to be a huge one for me because for a multitude of different reasons, right? You have a first-time quarterback and you have a first-time starter in Gunnar Stockton, and you are without your biggest interior pass rusher, especially on third down in Riley Mills. Somebody else is going to have to step up and take that cushion off of Howard Cross, right? Somebody else is going to have to step up and take that pressure away from Gabe Rubio, who's not a pass rusher, right? He's a run stopper. So who's the other pass rusher that's stepping up in place of Riley Mills? It's another smaller interior defensive lineman in Donnie Heinisch, who has played really well this season. But the Notre Dame edge rushers have to do a good job of getting pressure on Gunnar Stockton, because it's kind of the same thing that we talked about on the offensive side of the ball. The safeties can do well against the tight ends, right? Leonard Moore and Christian Gray can do their job against Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett and Arian Smith. Linebackers can do a good job filling and replacing in the run game, right? But if he has time to throw and he has the opportunity to get comfortable, and Howard Cross isn't able to get home, some of the interior defensive linemen aren't able to get home, you're going to need RJ Oben and Josh Burnham and Bryce Young and Junior Tuialamaka and whoever else is going to be in that rotation to step up big time. Situation, I mean, it could be Jalen Sneed, right? If Kingston is deemed healthy enough to go, I mean, it could be him. You're going to need somebody off the edge to step up and generate pressure because, one, that's going to help your interior pass rush, and two, that's going to put Al Golden in a situation where he's not going to have to start bringing in additional pressure with the linebackers to get home, because that's when all the mismatches start happening, right? You start bringing in more linebackers, which means you're bringing down your safeties to fill, which is putting them in binds with the Georgia tight ends. And so it's just this whole domino effect of, if you're not able to get home off of the edge from a pass rushing perspective, it's going to really hinder your defense. And from a running perspective, Nate Frazier and Trevor Etienne, they're not burners. Like they're not Jeremiah Love. They're not Jadarian Price. but they will gash you and have the ability to get.
And Frazier can
plays.
be.
Yeah,
like he's a freshman. He'll eventually be that kind of player. He'll eventually look like a Jadarian Price from a big play standpoint.
Yeah.
He just hasn't been that guy so far this year. Got to make sure that continues, obviously.
100%. And so being sound and disciplined and coming flat down the edge, off of the edge, RJ Oben has done a good job of that this year. So especially towards the latter half of the season. That's kind of Josh Burnham's bread and butter, is being a good run-stopping defensive end. And so that's going to have to continue. So in both phases, but mostly in the pass rush, the ends are going to have to find a way to get home, because I do think, due to injury, after Botelho goes down and then Boubacar goes down, that is the one position that, through all the injuries that have happened to Notre Dame this year, that's the position that has yet to have that "yo, I'm here" moment. And now they have the opportunity to go do it in the Sugar Bowl against a quarterback making his first start. So that, to me, is why that is the third overall key matchup for the defense.
I agree. This is a huge matchup, Trevor. The only thing I would add is I actually think this game is as important. This matchup is as important against the run as it is the pass. Where Notre Dame has been vulnerable in the run game this year, it's when people stretch them. That's where they've been able to open up some creases because of how aggressive Notre Dame is with their run stunts. If you can kind of stretch outside of it, Indiana had a couple plays like that. We saw Louisville had some plays like that. USC had some plays like that. The way you negate that is your ends have to be really physical setting the edge. At times against Indiana, they were really good at that. At times they weren't. I think that's going to be a big part of this one as well, is to be really stout at the edge. So, like, we're going to talk a lot about Bryce Young and Josh Burnham, but I'll tell you a guy that could be a factor as well is Junior Tuihalamaka and RJ Oben could be very important in this game when it comes to shutting down the run game with really stout edge support and set the edge effectively. Funnel everything back inside to your tackles and to your linebackers. And if they are going to get outside, force them to bounce. And now your safeties and your corners, who Notre Dame's corners have been very good in run support this season. And actually, the guy who's probably least effective in run support was Benjamin Morrison, but you weren't putting him in the game to be a run support guy. You're putting him in the game to be an elite cover guy.
Right.
But that's an area where, like, I've heard people say, well, Leonard Moore's better in coverage than Benjamin Morrison. I'm like, timeout. We can enjoy how good Benjamin Morrison is. I mean, how good Leonard Moore has been without being like, let's not get crazy now. Okay. There is no debate, however, that Leonard has been an upgrade when it comes to perimeter screen and run game support. So if you can force bounces where they got a bow, you're going to rally to that. What you can't do is let them stretch you. And then those physical, quick backs that do have speed are able to then gash you with these big run lanes, because the Indiana kids didn't have the speed to turn those into 50-yard gains. They were going to be 20-yard gains, 15 to 20-yard gains. I think Nate Frazier especially has the speed to turn those into bigger gains if you're not disciplined. And so that's going to require good gap integrity from the tackles and from the linebackers, but you also can't allow yourself to get stretched out into oblivion if you're an edge player. I think that's going to be a huge, huge part of this game. If the edge players play well in all phases, it's going to be tough, because the other part too is, that's the biggest weakness on the Notre Dame defense is the edge. It's not a weakness. When you're at this stage, nobody has really a weakness. It's like, this is where you're least effective or most vulnerable against another really good team. And so when your least effective part of your defense plays well, you're a lot harder to beat. And that adds to the importance of that matchup that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. In both phases. And they're going to have to play. We've talked a lot about how there's no real player outside of maybe Gabe Rubio that has to play above, I don't want to say above expectation, but like above a level of where he's played at this season. I would also consider putting the edge rushers into that conversation. We talk about the guys along the offensive line. You don't have to go out and be Joe Alt. You don't have to go out and be Tommy Kramer. You don't have to go out and be Aaron Banks. Just be the best version of yourselves. But the edge rushers are going to have to be kind of that next level up in a game like this. I agree. Absolutely.
So, Trev, that's going to do it for our defensive breakdown of this game. This was yes, the offense needs to play well, but the defense got you here. they got to play well on this big stage. That's the big thing. Against a backup quarterback and offense, it's good, dangerous, but has not an elite offense, not like the one they had in 2022 or even late in 2021. It's not that group. You've got to be at your best. And that's really what it boils down to. So we're going to get into some other things next. But before we do, folks, see that little thumbs up button below you? Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. And if you've not done so, you're missing out. Sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trevor, we're going to dive into these final two segments are going to be more about sort of big picture. Notre Dame is going to win this game because of this, or if Notre Dame doesn't win the game, it'll be because of this. That's what segments are going to be about. The first one is going to be the 5 reasons that you and I believe that Notre Dame is going to win this football game. The segment after that will be the 3 biggest concerns that will keep Notre Dame from winning this football game. So let's dive into it, Trev. And yet again, we had 3 that I think were pretty much on same point. And we'll discuss a couple of those. And we'll start with that because this was our number one. A couple we had to move around, but this was both our first number one. And that is, if you just look at this from an unbiased standpoint, this is going to flip some Georgia fans out. But the reality is Notre Dame's been the more complete team this year, especially since that September 7th loss to Northern Illinois. And what I mean by complete team is we haven't seen the ups and downs from Notre Dame the last 11 during this 11-game win streak that we've seen from Georgia, right? So you look at Georgia looks great against Clemson. Then 2 weeks later, they should have got beat by Kentucky. And then a week after the game after that, with a bye, they got smoked by Alabama. And then they kind of get back to being Georgia, right? They look like Georgia again. You're like, okay, here you go. Georgia's being Georgia. You have a big game where you come off the Alabama loss. You beat Auburn by 18. You beat Mississippi State. You go on the road and you dominate Texas. Then you have a really sloppy game against Florida. And you often wonder, like, if DJ Lagway doesn't get hurt in that game, what happens in that game? And then you go get dominated by Ole Miss. And then you bounce back with a convincing second half against Tennessee to win that game. You look like trash against UMass and a lot on defense, still win the game convincingly. You need a miraculous comeback to beat Georgia Tech in overtime, and then you go out and once again shut down Texas's offense and win the SEC championship. This has been a very up and down team. Notre Dame has been a lot more steady. Notre Dame's bad performances have been like 14-point wins, over USC, where they never trailed in the game. They've been a lot more steady team. Now, Georgia's faced a lot tougher competition, but some of their downs have not been against Texas and Alabama, and it's been against Kentucky and UMass and, teams like Florida, teams like that. And then, of course, Ole Miss whooped them pretty good. And I just think also when you look at Georgia, there's some areas where they are really good, but some areas where they're really not good. They have more of those areas than Notre Dame does. Their rushing offense has just not been good this year, guys. I mean, look, you can say all you want about, they're this, they're that. They rank 98th in college football in yards rushing per game. Well, they don't run as much. All right, cool. They rank 80th in college football in yards per rush. You know what I mean? So, like, okay, they're just not good at that. They rank 75th in college football of most runs of 30 yards or more. They've got 6. Notre Dame has more rushing touchdowns of over 50 yards or more than Georgia has total runs of 6 yards or more, 30 yards or more. Right? So you look at their pass defense is also another area where they haven't been that good this year. Their run defense has been very inconsistent. So just overall, to me, Trevor, I think Notre Dame's the more complete football team. And if they play their game, I think they're the better team. Now, we're going to have some things we talk about whether or not they can play their game. But if Notre Dame goes out there and looks like the team they've been for most of this season, I think they're the better team. I really do. And the film tells me that. The stats tell me that. All the models tell me that. There's nothing that tells me Georgia's the better team outside of a couple non-matchup related things that we'll get into here in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to put even more context into some of the numbers that you had just provided, I talked about it when I was on with Vince. But Georgia's run offense has declined over the last couple of years. Like you just mentioned, they're 98th in yards per game and they're 80th in yards per carry. In 2023, they were number 21 in yards per game, and in 2022, they were number 19 in yards per game. In 2023, they were number 11 in yards per attempt, and in 2022, they were number 5. I agree that I do think the schedule does play a part in that. I do.
Can't
But
ignore that. I mean, you
yeah,
can't, as much as you want to tell yourself as a Notre Dame fan, just look at the numbers. You can't ignore the fact that they've played some really good teams. You can't. And you're not. I'm just saying, like,
yeah,
I know a lot of Notre Dame fans just want to ignore that and be like, well, just the numbers are the numbers. No, that's not how it works. It is relative to
yep.
what you play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm under the impression that both things can be true. I don't think Georgia's rush offense is what it was, and they played a harder schedule because the desperation between 11th and 98th has a little bit more to do than just your schedule, right? Now, the schedule is a factor, right? Rotating offensive linemen is a factor. Now, me being a Notre Dame fan, you're not going to get a whole lot of sympathy from me for injuries along the offensive line. You're just not. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? But that is a real thing.
Facts.
Yeah.
I don't
You
hear
know?
how banged up your defensive line is. And
No.
that's why you haven't been able to stop UMass and
Yeah.
and Georgia Tech. I don't want to hear it. Like
No.
Notre Dame's missing 3 starting offensive linemen in this game. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, man. But I do believe that both things can be true. But you look at Notre Dame on paper and they are the more balanced team.
Yeah.
Down to the stats, right? Like it's you look at their box scores in games. And a lot of times it's, 240 yards rushing, 210 yards passing, 198 yards passing, 230 yards on the ground. Like it's just, they are a very balanced football team, which is why they've been so difficult to stop. Now, is it the sexiest thing in the world? No. That's why people discredit Notre Dame's offense isn't that good. Really? Because they score almost 40 points a game. They're at 39.8. They're the 4th ranked scoring offense in the country. So obviously whatever they're doing is working. It just doesn't look like what you want it to.
And what's funny, Trevor, too, is if you take out what Notre Dame did against MAC teams, their scoring offense is even better. I mean, they averaged 40 points on the season. They averaged 38.3 points per game. If you take out Army, Navy, Miami, Ohio, and Northern Illinois, their scoring average goes up to 40.3. They've scored more points against Power 5 teams than they have FBS teams, like the group of 5 teams. Here's another thing. So, okay, Notre Dame fans, you guys are being biased. All right, cool. There's probably some of that. I mean, we tried our best to give it an analysis, but maybe you could say that. But okay, let's look at some unbiased things. All right. ESPN Football Power Index, not exactly a huge like pro Notre Dame entity over the years. They have Notre Dame as the number 3 team in the country. They have Georgia number 5. You look at their Football Power Index efficiencies, okay, where they rank teams based on who they play. This isn't just looking at numbers where you beat your Liberty and you beat up a bunch of nobodies, right? They take into context who you play. ESPN Football Power Index has the Georgia offense ranked number 6 and the Notre Dame offense ranked number 11, 5-point gap. The Football Power Index at ESPN has Notre Dame's defense ranked 2nd and Georgia's defense ranked 17th. Again, more complete team. And that has to be taken into consideration when you're breaking these games down and you're looking at who these teams are. Now, there is a big advantage for Georgia in special teams. They're 29th and Notre Dame is 101st. That's could be big. But this isn't just us. Look at the Fermo Efficiency Index. Again, something that takes into efficiency, takes out garbage time, takes out garbage points, garbage yards, looks at who you're playing, the quality of the competition you're playing. And you look at where the Fermo Efficiency Index has Notre Dame and Georgia. Notre Dame is the number 3 team on the FEI. Georgia's number 8. Notre Dame's offense ranks number 9 on the Fermo Efficiency Index. Georgia's offense ranks 10th. Notre Dame's defense ranks number 1 on the Fermo Efficiency Index, and Georgia's ranks 13th. Now, again, that takes into consideration who they have played. It's just not raw numbers. So this isn't just couple Notre Dame dudes that break down film and look at stats, picking Notre Dame team. This is every metric shows that. A lot of the computer models show that. Now, that only gets you so far, right? It doesn't win you football games, but that's why we say big if, Notre Dame plays their game, they're the better team. And I believe that. The film tells me that. The consistency tells me that. The numbers tell me that. And the computers all tell me that. Now they got to go prove it. Here's the reason number 2. In a lot of these settings, it's who can run the ball better. Who can run the ball better? Now, it's not always true, but in a lot of these situations, Trevor, that is a big part of success in college football. Who can run the ball better than the other team? And here's a fact. Notre Dame's rushing offense has been better this year than Georgia's rushing defense. Notre Dame's rushing defense this year has been better than Georgia's rushing offense. Now, it may not play out that way, right? But if Notre Dame plays their game again, point number 2 for me is that Notre Dame is the team that is better on against the run. For years, people have said the team that runs the football and the team that stops the run are going to win championships. How many yards a game did Georgia's 2 championship teams give up on the ground? 78 and 77. And both of those teams ran the ball very effectively, especially in 2022. That was Georgia's recipe for success in their 2 title teams. It's not the only reason why, but it played a big, big role. Georgia in 2021 rushed for 191.1 yards per game, 5.3 per carry, gave up 78.9 yards per game, 2.6 yards per carry. Their 2022 title team rushed for 205.3 yards per game, 5.5 yards per carry, and their opponents only rushed for 77 yards a game, 2.9 yards a carry. This year, Georgia's rushing for 129.2 yards per game, giving up 4.2, or rushing for 4.2. They're giving up 127.8, and they're giving up 3.7. Big drop down on rush offense, big drop up. And you look at Notre Dame and what Notre Dame has been this season. Notre Dame has been arguably the best Power 5 team in the country at rushing the football. In games against Power 5 opponents, there's no Power 5 football team in the country that averages more yards per game and more yards per carry against other Power 5 teams in those matchups. Not a one. Notre Dame still averages over 200 yards a game against Power 5 only teams, and that has not been the case for Georgia this season. And so there's a big, big advantage, in my opinion, when it comes to who these teams are. You look at Notre Dame's run defense. Notre Dame this year in Power 5 only games. Notre Dame's played 9 of them. So you take out the 2 option teams and the 2 MAC teams. Notre Dame is holding opponents to 111.1 yards per game. And Georgia this season in their run defense has been pretty good as well. They're holding teams to 119.9, 3.6 yards per game compared to 3.4 for Notre Dame. So Notre Dame has even been the better run defense this season on paper. And I think the film shows that too, certainly more consistent, especially when you take out the triple option teams. So similar run defenses, Notre Dame has a significantly better rush offense. I think that's going to play a huge role in this game. Now, it's got to be carried out that way. It's got to be executed that way. But looking at why I think going in, Notre Dame will win the game, that's a big part of it. They run it better, and at worst, they stop the run as well as Georgia, and in a lot of cases, better than Georgia. Again, you could say, well, Haynes King, didn't play against Notre Dame, and that's why they rushed for 68 yards. Fair, but what does that have to do with Jamal Haynes having more yards on the first play of the game than he had an entire 4 quarters against Notre Dame? Against Georgia, first play of the game, I think he had 3 runs against Georgia that were all longer than what he had total yards against Notre Dame's defense. So Haynes King would have mattered, but not that much. And so that's my reason number 2, Trev, on why I think Notre Dame is going to win this football game. What's your number 2 reason?
Yeah, I mean, my second reason is Georgia hasn't played a football game in 25 days. Like they've been sitting and waiting. And I think both things can be true, right? There's a lot of conversation around, they've been banged up. They're finally healthy. They've gotten time for Gunnar Stockton to get implemented into the offense, and he's taken more first-team reps. Like, all those things are true, right? But what is also true is we saw in the first round of the playoffs, each team that played showed signs of the rust coming off a little bit. Some were more evident than others, right? SMU, it was a little bit more evident than like IU's rust coming off, things like that. But each team showed a lack of execution, a little bit of sloppiness, like kind of getting back into the grind of hard-nosed physical contact football. And so one of the things that Notre Dame has the advantage of in this game is they just played. They played week and a half ago. And Georgia's kind of just been sitting and waiting, and their last time out was the SEC title game on December 7th. So I view that as very much looking at it from a Notre Dame perspective. They're a rhythm-based team, and we've been saying that all season long. And once this team starts rolling, they start rolling. There's a reason why they've won 11 straight, 10 of those by double digits. And Georgia's been a team that has been inconsistent and sloppy at times. One of their sloppiest games came off of a bye week in the first half of the Alabama game. And that was a week, So I think both things can be true. I think the team is more well-rested. I do. And I think that time has been crucial for Gunnar Stockton to get more implemented into the offense. But when you start talking about the level of physicality in this game, Notre Dame kind of shaked off some of that rust, right? Because Indiana, that was a physical football game. If you watch that game, like it wasn't a, game of finesse. Those were two teams that were getting after it, man. And so for me, that swings advantage to Notre Dame because you have two physical football teams going at it, and one of them hasn't had any physical contact in close to a month.
Trev, this is one of the great unknowns of the college football playoff because we don't know, we know that long layoffs, this has been argued a lot, that long layoffs played a big role in why we had so many semifinal blowouts. And every year except 2017, we had semifinal blowouts. And a lot of people attribute that to the fact that you get these long layoffs. And, in 2014, Oregon beats Florida State 59-20. And that game got played on January 1st. The last time that those two teams played was December 6th. And you look at 2015, we had similar matchups. Clemson beats Oklahoma by 20. Alabama beats Michigan State 38-0. Title game was a lot more competitive. In 2016, you had Clemson beats Ohio State 31-0 in that game. Now, remember that year Ohio State didn't play in the Big Ten title game, so they went over a month without playing a football game. They beat Michigan in overtime, didn't play a game, and lose 31-0 to Clemson. And Alabama beats Washington 24-7, and their offense looked like a shell of itself from the regular season. The next year, 2017, you didn't have any blowouts, although Alabama beat Clemson 24-6. That wasn't a blowout. You had a blocked punt for a touchdown. It was a sloppy game from both teams. You look at 2018, obviously Notre Dame gets blown out by Clemson. Alabama beats Oklahoma 45-34 in a game that wasn't as close as the final score. 2019, LSU beats Oklahoma 63-28. 2020, you have Alabama blows out Notre Dame. Clemson gets blown out by Ohio State. 2022, Alabama blows out Cincinnati. Georgia blows out Michigan. 2023, you have two close competitive games in the first round and then a blowout in the title game. So there's really two exceptions to the rule where we haven't seen first round blowouts. And then we saw that in the first round of the playoff. But here's what we don't know. We don't know the impact of a team that's been off for a month, basically, versus a team that just played a little over a week ago. That's the intriguing part of this matchup. Is one team more rested and somehow that makes them better? Is one team more, hey, we're in our rhythm because we had to go play a game? We've had more, we don't know the answer to that. But that's what makes your key number two very interesting. And Nick Saban was talking about this the other day. Because one of the hardest things to do when you've had a month off is to tackle. Well, Notre Dame had to tackle a lot a week ago, and Georgia hasn't tackled anybody in a month, basically. So how will that impact this game? That's a great question. We don't know the answer to that, but it's certainly something that I think, based on history, would show that that's going to have a pretty big impact on it. I mean, you look at Georgia's two playoff appearances when they won the title. First year, they really whipped Michigan. Really whipped Michigan. 34-11. The game wasn't really that close. Michigan just did not look like the team we saw in the regular season. They didn't look anything like what they had. Now, was that rust or was Georgia just a better team? We don't know the answer to that, right? This is a Michigan team that had been scoring on everybody up to that point in time in the season, and they just couldn't move the ball at all. They looked sloppy. They weren't on the same page. They just didn't look like the same team. Year later, Ohio State backs into the college football playoff. Literally, teams just kept losing to get them back in, despite the fact they had lost their last game. And they back in and they give Georgia everything they could handle. Led, was it 28-24 at halftime? And Marvin Harrison gets knocked out of the game. That kind of helped Georgia win by a point. Ohio State misses a field goal at the end, et cetera, et cetera. Was that just Ohio State playing out of their minds? Was that Georgia being rusty, not being able to tackle? We don't know the answer to that. But a lot of coaches will tell you that time off can be a problem. And we've seen a lot of BCS national title game blowouts in the past too that kind of plays into that, right? Do you lose your momentum? Do you have issues with tackling? Does your rhythm go off? You're traveling and it's out of your normal routine. Where Georgia's first game since the SEC title game is this big spectra, of the Sugar Bowl and the media days, and also where Notre Dame's got a game under their belt, and they got to do all this stuff, but they're fresh off of a game. Does that impact the game? I think it could, Trev. I think that's a huge part of this, and I love that you pointed out because it wasn't really something I was thinking about when we were doing our prep, and then when you said it, I was like, that's a really interesting part of this game. Could it have an impact? We're going to find out. But if Georgia loses this game, there will be people that will say that's one of the reasons why. But that's going to be the interesting thing about how does the bye, could it be something that at times hurts you, depending on who you're going against in round 2? It's going to be interesting. Number 3, Trev, this is one that I think is the biggest one for Notre Dame fans to accept. SEC fans are not going to accept this, but I don't even think Notre Dame fans, to a degree, accept this. This is the first time that Notre Dame's played a team like this, Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, where I felt like athletically, Notre Dame doesn't take a back seat. Speed-wise, Notre Dame doesn't take a back seat. There's some areas where maybe Georgia's faster. Receiver, they have more speed there. At least the guys that play. Running back, they don't. Notre Dame's got more athletes at quarterback. I think Notre Dame's faster at corner. I think Georgia's got a great linebacking core. Notre Dame's runs every bit as good as their linebackers run. Not saying they're better. I'm just saying athletically and speed. And I think this is something that was not true in 2020 against think about the 2017 matchup. Their number 3 running back was DeAndre Swift. He was their number 3 running back. They were then what I think Notre Dame is now at running back. They had Terry Godwin. They had Javon Wims, and Notre Dame was not that team. Notre Dame was a big physical power team. And in this instance, I think this is the first time that Notre Dame can go toe-to-toe. Maybe not faster overall, maybe not more athletic, but because they are on that level, I think that's going to play a huge role in this game because some of the times when the line would make the plays that were needed to make, the backs just weren't quite good enough to hit it. That won't be the case this time. You make 3 mistakes against this Notre Dame offense, they're going to be 3 big plays. Indiana's run defense had 3 mistakes against Notre Dame's defense. 2 of them got turned into 118 yards, including a 98-yard touchdown. 1 bad run fit is a 98-yard touchdown against Notre Dame. And this has been true all year. All year. Texas A&M makes 1 bad open field angle against Jadarian Price, and it's a 47-yard touchdown run. And that wasn't the case in the past. It's like, well, Trevor, you were talking about this. Some Georgia folks saying like, well, he doesn't go for 98 against Georgia. If they fit the same exact way and they execute that play the same exact way, they don't have DBs that are catching Jeremiah Love. Like, I don't think y'all understand. This isn't Tony Jones. This isn't Josh Adams. This isn't Kyron Williams, who's a great player, but not a 4-4 guy. Notre Dame's throwing 4-4 guys out there. And to me, that's something that's different about this Notre Dame team compared to past Notre Dame teams. It's not the only reason, but it certainly is a reason. And that's something that gives me a lot more confidence that Notre Dame can compete in a game like this than it did in the past, where you were like, well, if this happens, that happens, that happens, that happens, that happens, and Notre Dame can force 3 turnovers, then I think they got a shot to maybe play with Alabama. Now it's play your game. Play your game.
Well, I mean, to touch on a point that you had brought up, people don't want to accept it because it goes against the narrative of what Notre Dame football is. They're fundamentally sound and they're tough and they're big and they execute well and they don't commit a lot of mistakes, but, they just lack in the overall top-end talent. It's just not true this year. Look, and it's not a slight to what you brought up. It's not a slight to Georgia fans specifically. That's what we've seen for 13 games this year. I mean, even Northern Illinois, Notre Dame played like garbage in that game. But at no point did I look at that and say, man, Northern Illinois' guys are just better than Notre Dame's. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you go through and look at it, and no team was fast enough to catch Jeremiah Love. And I think that's true throughout the playoffs. Like, that's not Georgia specific. That's Jeremiah Love specific.
Same problem.
Yeah.
Same problem against these running backs.
Yeah. Like that's not specific to just Georgia. But the thing is now Notre Dame has these athletes sprinkled and spread out throughout their team. It's not just a guy here and a guy there. You know what I mean? Like, in years past, it's like they had Kyle Hamilton and then like a bunch of the other guys that fit the old narrative.
Right.
You know, they had Jalen Smith and then a bunch of guys that fit the old narrative.
And the guy next to him was Dan Fox.
Right.
Or the other secondary guys. Yeah, you had Kyle Hamilton and Owusu-Koramoah in 2020, but the rest of your group was like Clarence Lewis and, you know, guys that aren't those guys.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was Drew White. It was a completely different animal.
Yeah.
And where are these guys from? Where's Leonard Moore from? Texas. Where's Jadarian Price from? Texas. Where's Christian Gray and Jeremiah Love from? St. Louis. Where's Jaden Osbury from? Baton Rouge. Where's Jalen Sneed from? South Carolina. This is why you go down south and get those guys. Now, and then you put them with the best athletes from the north. Drake Bowens, Jack Kaisers, Adon Schulers, right? And that's what Notre Dame has been able to do from a recruiting standpoint. Is you go down, look, the best athletes are by and large in the South. Not all. Saquon Barkley's not from the South, right? But by and large, there's a lot more down there. And that's what Notre Dame has done with this staff, is they've gone down there and they get those players. Where, you know, and that's played a big role in why they're where they are. You're still getting the best athletes from the North, but you're also getting some of those top athletes from the South. I mean, Jaden Osbury's a top 100 recruit. Jeremiah Love, top 100 recruit. Jadarian Price, top 250 recruit.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Leonard Moore was overlooked. I graded him out as a top 150 guy with top 50 upside. I mean, you're not trying to win with like Troy Pride and a bunch of smart guys, right? Where Troy Pride was that one really fast guy from the South. And everybody else were mostly Northern, Mid-Atlantic guys that were just smart and good athletes, but not elite speed, right? Julian Love ran a mid 4.5 at the combine. There's no in the secondary right now that's playing cornerback, I should say, that's running anywhere close to that. That's the difference. Kyron Williams, great college player. He ran a 4.6. Audric Estime ran a 4.6. Like, Notre Dame doesn't have anybody coming close to that in the 40-yard dash in their running back room right now. So it's just a different animal.
Yeah, man. I mean, the difference overall is when I've watched the team this season in comparison to others is there's been a lot of, you know, they were there. They just didn't have the speed. You know what I mean? Like, they were in the right spot. They just got like the other guy was better. Now, when I look at this Notre Dame team play, it's not they just came up short athletically. It's they came up short from an execution standpoint. Sometimes in like a case like Adon Schulers, he's so fast that he flies in out of control. And that's where the play gets missed. Not because they get beat to the perimeter and nobody can catch them. You know, that hasn't really been an issue that we've seen from this Notre Dame team this year on defense. And then on offense, again, you see it. I mean, the second somebody starts looking at taillights with 4 and 24, like it's a track meet, like nobody's catching them. And again, not a slight to Georgia or the SEC or like that's every single team that they've played, you know? And so it's an advantage, you know, like it's something that swings in Notre Dame's favor for the first time in my lifetime that I can say that about a team where Notre Dame just has really good athletes loaded throughout the team. Yeah, you and I were talking, you know, earlier last week of it's weird to hear this matchup being like the size and the strength of Georgia versus like the speed and athleticism of Notre Dame. You know, like it's a cool conversation to be having, man.
It's a lot different from that 2017 matchup where it was like the big physical Notre Dame lines with 340-pound Quentin Nelson and 320-pound Mike McGlinchey and 320-pound Alex Bars against the speed of Georgia.
Right.
Roquan Smith and guys like that. I mean, you know, it was just different. It's like almost like the roles have been reversed to a degree of those two teams. And so, you know, again, execution is still the key, but they're not going to lose because they can't run with Georgia. It doesn't mean that they're going to win because they're faster, but it means that they're not going to lose because they can't run with them. It's going to come down to execution, those type of things. It's a very different, and I think that's where a lot of people have missed the boat on this Notre Dame team, including some of their opponents. I think you kind of come in still buying the narrative of who you think Notre Dame is and not who Notre Dame actually is. I mean, Notre Dame lost Benjamin Morrison, who is one of the 5 best corners in college football, and got faster with his replacement. Now, I'm not saying better, but taller, like you said, Trev, and faster. Certainly true. So that's a big part of it. Number 4 to me, Trev, and I'll be very brief with this one because I've already kind of touched on it a little bit. Every matchup on paper favors Notre Dame, with the exception of the Notre Dame pass offense against the Georgia pass defense. And even that one doesn't favor Notre Dame from the standpoint of yards and such, but it does somewhat favor Notre Dame in some other areas, primarily when you look at it from, their pass defense and Notre Dame's pass offense are not even close, because Georgia ranks, I think, 50. I'm pull up the numbers now. I think Georgia's 51st in pass defense, where Notre Dame is 100th. You look at their yards per attempt. Notre Dame is 78th. Georgia's 41st. Yards per completion, 114th to 52nd. Completion percentage, Notre Dame is 14th. Georgia is 41st. Pass efficiency defense, Georgia's 40th. Notre Dame's pass efficiency offense is 41st. There's a difference between the volume and the style compared to the effectiveness. And when you look at the numbers that have to do with effectiveness, efficiency, they're exactly on the same page. Notre Dame sacks allowed, 29th. Georgia sacks for 20th. Notre Dame's 129th in most passing plays of 30 yards or more. Georgia only ranks 71st in most allowed. So even in that area, the matchup, in my opinion, statistical matchup and the on-paper matchup is pro-Georgia, but it's not by the margin that I think Notre Dame has the matchup in other areas. The question then comes down to, can you execute in those areas? But that, again, is the biggest difference between this game and the last 2 games against Georgia, where you kind of needed some guys to play above their level, to play better than they were, or you needed guys to be at their very best. This isn't that. This is you as a team play your game. Doesn't mean you have to play the absolute best you can possibly play to hopefully win with a walk-off field goal. It just means if you play your game, you're the better team. I believe that. I truly believe that. That's not Notre Dame homerism. I know all the things that even some Notre Dame fans are saying, oh, you're just saying that because guys, I believe this. We'll see if it plays out that way, but I believe this going into the matchup that Notre Dame has the better team. And the matchups favor Notre Dame in almost every statistical measure. And again, if you don't want to believe me, then look at the ESPN rankings, look at the FEI rankings, look at the Sagarin. I mean, every single metric that I have seen has Notre Dame significantly ahead of Georgia defensively, and their offenses are very close. And in some, Notre Dame is even ranked higher. And that to me is big. And that it wasn't true when they played Bama in 2020. It wasn't true when they played Clemson in 2020, when they were actually healthy and had Trevor Lawrence and Mike Jones and Tyler Davis and all those guys healthy and weren't out for COVID stuff. It wasn't true when they played Georgia in 2019. Notre Dame stayed in that Georgia game in 2019 because they had a great defensive line and because they couldn't cover Tyler Eifert. Cole Kmet. Yeah. It's the only reason. Mm-hmm. And we forget Georgia Notre Dame had a chance to win that game, but Georgia also was up 23-10 at one point in time in the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. And then because of the Notre Dame offense. And this is a different animal, Trev, than that. And that's how I see it. What's your number 4?
Yeah, my number 4 kind of ties into the athleticism conversation that we had. Not only does Notre Dame have the speed and athleticism to now compete with that upper echelon of college football, I firmly believe that they have a coordinator duo that now allows them to compete at that level as well. Mike Denbrock and Al Golden, I believe, are one of the best. They are a top 3 coordinator duo in college football, and I don't think they're third. I think very highly of them, like most people do. I know SEC fans have a lot of high regard for Mike Denbrock. I know that for a fact. And now he's coaching back home in South Bend, right? So I think having this level of experience, because that's been something that's kind of hindered Notre Dame before in the past, right? Brian Kelly, albeit for what he was, he's played in big games, right? He coached in the national championship game in 2012. He coached in a playoff game in 2018. He coached in the ACC conference title game in 2020 and in the playoffs in 2020. But where they kind of lacked sometimes was like a coordinator position, right? Now I believe that they have 2 coordinators that have the experience. And Mike Denbrock just spent the last 2 seasons coaching in the SEC. So you combine that with Al Golden, who is now having, I would argue, his best season as a defensive coordinator in South Bend. Last year, the numbers were fantastic. But he's even came out and said he has never in the history of him being a coach has had to deal with this level of injuries and the guys still performing at the level that they are. So once you factor in all of those things, I think the coordinator duo also is going to help Notre Dame get over that hump. There's not a lot of things that these two guys haven't seen. And one thing that's kind of behind the scenes that not a lot of people talk about is they will bounce ideas off of each other. There's a lot of collaboration between those two guys to help them get better week in and week out. And it's shown, right? Notre Dame has a lot of talent, but we've seen teams with a lot of talent that don't perform as well with Notre Dame. You could make the argument that there's been teams with better talent in terms of recruiting stars and caliber of athletes, whatever, not even perform as well as Notre Dame because they don't have that coordinator duo. And so in a game like this, in a situation like this where we're going to get into talking about, aspects of Notre Dame's team that are unproven on this stage, behind it in the two driver's seats of the offense and the defense, you have two guys that have a lot of experience at this level. Al Golden coaching in the NFL. He has head coaching experience. And now he's in his third year of having one of the best defenses in the country. And a guy like Mike Denbrock, who's very seasoned, just spent time coaching in the SEC, just spent time coaching against Georgia, right? So to me, I think that's a big advantage for Notre Dame in this one.
So, Trev, let's get to number 5 because you and I are on the same page on number 5 as well, and we'll just dive right into it. Notre Dame's better quarterback. And this is the biggest difference from what we've seen in past games. Now, part of that is, okay, well, they're playing their backup quarterback. Well, that's the reality of the situation. I think I would take Riley Leonard over Gunnar Stockton, over Carson Beck for what Notre Dame does. And I'm sure Georgia would probably prefer Carson Beck over Riley Leonard for what they want to do offensively. That's fine. But this is not a Carson Beck versus Riley Leonard matchup. This is a Riley Leonard versus Gunnar Stockton matchup. And even if Gunnar Stockton had a whole year of starting under his belt, and this wasn't about experience, Riley Leonard's a better quarterback than he is. And they're very similar in style, but Riley's more experienced, he's more athletic, and he's more talented. That's just how I look at it. He's obviously more experienced. He's played on this stage to a degree, not to this degree, but Gunnar Stockton has even played on the stage that we're talking about as a starter. And I've said this a million times, coming off the bench in the middle of the game when you don't have any time to think about what's about to happen is a whole lot different than having an entire week to prepare where you are the guy. It's a different animal. How many times, Trev, have we seen in the NFL where a guy comes off the bench, starts 3 or 4 games in the NFL, plays great, some team is dumb enough to sign him in the offseason to a big contract, and then he goes back to playing like, oh, that's why he was why he was the backup at that team.
Oh, yeah.
Is because now you're the guy, all the pressure's on you, and teams are now game planning for what you can do. Now, the game planning for what he is going to be a little bit of a challenge, but it's not a mystery. The kid rushed for over 4,000 yards in high school. Notre Dame's not going to be completely, or better not be, completely unprepared for, well, gee, what if they run power read? Or what if they run read zone? Or what if they, you know what I mean? Those things are all kind of part of this conversation. And so that's just simply a fact is right now, this is the first time Notre Dame has gone into a game like this where they're better quarterback. And I would even say that that's true in 2019 against Georgia. I had more faith that Jake Fromm was going to make those plays in the fourth quarter to win that game than I did Ian Book would. Why? Because I see Jake Fromm do it for 3 years. You know what I mean? Like I'd seen him do it in title games, SEC championship games against Notre Dame, And so 2018, Ian Book versus Trevor Lawrence. Really? 2012, Ev Golson against, what was the name of that kid?
A.J.
McCarron. Okay, maybe Notre Dame had the more talented quarterback, but A.J. McCarron was a far more experienced, proven quarterback. 2020, Mac Jones versus Ian Book, it's not even close. So 2020 versus Ian Book again against Trevor Lawrence, that now junior version of Trevor Lawrence, not even close. This is the first time you could go into a game like this, even if Carson Beck was playing, we say Notre Dame is at the very least on the same level with you at quarterback. Now that he's out, it's for sure they were better quarterback. And that's the final reason for me. And this is why you brought in Riley Leonard. This is the game that you brought him in for. Now it's time to go prove it. But that's the final reason that I think Notre Dame wins this football game.
Yeah, man, I'm in line with you. Notre Dame has a quarterback advantage, which I haven't been able to say that in big matchups like this, right? And it's not just because it's Gunnar Stockton's first time starting, but that is a factor. I mean, look, I think you said it perfectly. When you come in off the bench, and this is not to discredit what the kid did in the SEC title game, because like you still feel the magnitude of the game, but the pressure's not as heightened as if you're the starter coming into that game. Carson Beck goes down. Nobody was expecting it, but injuries are a part of the game. And it's kind of just that, hey, kid, go out and, don't mess up. Execute. You've gotten these reps in practice. We trusted you enough to bring you into this program. And he did what he had to, right? Like they came back and won. No discredit. But that's different than hearing all the noise for 25 days about what's Georgia going to do without Carson Beck. You know what I mean? Like, this is going to be the best defense that they have faced, right? Texas is comparable, but this is one of the better pass defense that they've faced. It's one of the more talented defenses that they've faced. And that's going to be a lot of things running through the kid's head. But even outside of that, Riley Leonard and what he means for Notre Dame, you said it at the start of the season, is Notre Dame goes as far as what Riley Leonard takes him. And the thing that plagued Notre Dame against Georgia in 2017 and 2019 was quarterback play. They got the ball at the end of the game with the opportunity to go down, drive down the field, and score and win. Now, there are some question marks that I have about Riley Leonard, right? Because Notre Dame hasn't played in a lot of games where they've trailed. That could happen in the Sugar Bowl. Let's see how they respond. But I have more faith in Riley Leonard's response being down than I do Gunnar Stockton's. Because I've seen Riley Leonard play from behind. I saw Riley Leonard lead a comeback when Notre Dame played Duke against a really good defense. Notre Dame's guys just made more plays at the end.
It wasn't coming back from a deficit, but it was a late fourth quarter tie ball game. You've got to put an 80-yard drive together at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
As well. In the Coliseum, tied at halftime. You just threw a pick. USC gets the ball. You've got to go make some plays to put the game away, and he's done that. So he's never had to do it where they're behind, but I think tied against A&M on the road is very close to you're down 3. It's the same thing. You've got to go make these plays.
Yeah.
You win and you score and you win. You don't, you're done. Because if you punt the ball back to A&M there, they're leaning on your offense, on your defense. Notre Dame's defense starting to wear down a little bit against the size of that Georgia or Texas A&M line. Their big old running backs, Le'Veon Moss, that's how they got their late scoring drive, was just kind of leaning on Notre Dame. Your offense needed to step up and make those plays, and Riley made 2 huge plays on that drive. The third down pass to Jaden Greathouse, and then the back shoulder throw against Will Lee to Bo Collins. And then he had some runs that worked too. So that's a moment where you can look at and say that we can see translate, certainly can see translate to where all the pressure's on you. You got to make plays, and he was able to make those plays.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you go back and, even the first round of the playoff game, it was early in the game. His first pass of the game was picked off, And then how do you respond? Yes, the 98-yard touchdown to Jeremiah Love. But then the drive after that, you put together 16 plays, 80-something yards, took over 9 minutes off the clock, 45 minutes of real time. I mean, that's, to your point, it's all translatable. And that advantage goes to Riley Leonard. So I agree. He's going to be a difference maker in this one. It's why he came to Notre Dame.
Yeah. So that's the 5 reasons that we think Notre Dame is going to win this football game, Trev. And before we go to our final section, which are our 3 biggest concerns and things that could derail that potential big win for Notre Dame, do us a favor, folks. Hit that like button for us. Help us kind of with whatever the algorithm is. It helps with the algorithm to help more people see it. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, hit that notification bell, and, of course, share this podcast. And make sure you've signed up for our premium message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trev, the final part of today's show, we do have a few super chats we'll get to at the end, but final part of today's show is we talked about the matchups, we talked about why we think Notre Dame is going to win, but this is not a game where you're just going to go out there and roll the balls out and win this football game. This is an outstanding football team. I believe Notre Dame and Georgia are 2 of the 4 best teams of college football. I do believe the 4 best teams of college football are all playing each other Saturday or this weekend, or I guess it's this week, right? I think that Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, and Georgia are the 4 best teams in college football. I think Texas is 5, Penn State 6. Of the teams, if I'm ranking the teams in the college football playoff right now, this is an outstanding football team. And if you don't play your game, they can beat you. So the final part of what we're going to discuss today are what are the 3 things that could keep Notre Dame from doing what they need to do. And for somebody asking about predictions, our prediction show will be tomorrow. We will do our keys to victory, our normal keys to victory. We'll do our predictions at the end of the show and as well. So we'll have that tomorrow. Today, we're just talking about sort of the bigger picture breakdown of the game. So we're going to talk about 3 things that if Notre Dame loses, there's a good reason that we can kind of point to these things as being factors in that defeat. The first one, Trevor, is matchups favor Notre Dame, stats favor Notre Dame, all these different things favor Notre Dame, but there's one thing that very, very, very clearly favors Georgia. They have a head coach and they have several players on this team, including starters, that have not only been here before, they've been on even bigger stages. They've got 2 rings. There's guys that will start for Georgia on Saturday that played on or started on or played a lot on a national championship football team. That experience is the one thing that is my biggest hang-up. There's really 2 that are my biggest hang-ups where it's you. I don't know how you can account for it. I don't know how you can game plan for it. I don't know how you can I just don't know how you can do anything about it. It's just you're either ready for it or you're not. You step up in the moment or you don't. And that is this. The Notre Dame is unproven on this stage. And what I mean unproven is, number one, none of these players have been on this stage, not to this degree. Notre Dame as a program has been here, and I guess you could say like Howard Cross played in the playoffs in 2020 and that type of thing, but they don't have guys that have played on this stage. Notre Dame as a program, when they've been on the stage, has not looked good. They've gotten embarrassed, whether it's 2020 playoff, 2020 ACC title game, 2018 playoff, 2012 BCS title game. They have not. I mean, you could go all the way back to the 2006 Sugar Bowl against LSU. You go back to the 2005 Fiesta Bowl. You look at the 2015 Fiesta Bowl. When they've been on this stage against another premier program, they have faltered. And until Notre Dame shows they can do that, you have to have a healthy skepticism about it being done. That's a fair thing to say. Now, if you're someone who just assumes they're going to lose, it's like, don't be that guy. They may, but you also can't be someone who just ignores that reality as if it doesn't have any impact at all. It may not, but if it does, that's advantage Georgia. And when you have 2 teams that are very closely matched, and as I said, the matchups favor Notre Dame, but not by a ton. You know what I mean? Like it's not by like one bad game from this guy, and now all of a sudden the matchup flips to the other side. You know what I mean? And so you look at it, Trev, just being on the stage, we don't know how Notre Dame's going to handle playing the stage. And look, yeah, they played great last week in the first half against Indiana at home. That's a whole different animal than heading down to New Orleans, sleeping in a bed you're not used to, playing against this football team in what will likely be a more pro-Georgia crowd, in front of a pro-Georgia crowd. That's a completely different animal than what this Notre Dame, even playing at Kyle Field, this is a different animal. And Kirby Smart has proven he can win on the stage. Marcus Freeman and his staff have not. And that's the number one biggest concern I have about what could keep Notre Dame from accomplishing what we said in the last section, which is we do think they're going to win the football game. But this is the one thing that strikes me as the biggest concern.
Yeah, it does for me too. I mean, Notre Dame, to your point, when they've gotten to this stage, has not looked good. And you can even draw back, instances in the regular season where the moment was a little bit too big for the coaching staff. You think about Ohio State 2023, you run 10 guys onto the field out of a timeout, and so it just, those mistakes really haven't mounted up as much as in previous years this season, right? But you also haven't played on the stage yet this season. You know what I mean? So it's going to come down to what wins the day. Is it going to be Kirby Smart's experience? Is it going to be the player's experience playing in this type of game, right? Always being in contention for the SEC championship game. You won 2 of the last 3 national championships, right? Or can Marcus Freeman rely on being disciplined enough to do what he did all season to get here, being his authentic self and still staying aggressive and because we've seen coaches on this stage kind of go back into a shell a little bit and go away from what got them there, right? Prime example is what happened to IU when they played at Notre Dame. They're punting down multiple scores in plus territory. And like, it was not on brand for what they were. And so to me, that's the biggest tell, right? Like there's things where people are like, well, how can you gauge that? And it's, to me, it's stuff like that. You go away from what your identity is because the moment got too big. It's, oh, well, we didn't want to make a mistake, so we just didn't do it.
Right.
Well, why has Notre Dame been so great this year? They played not afraid to make the mistake, especially towards the latter half of the season. At the start of the season, it was a little bit of that, especially on offense. They went away with that and they started trusting their guys, and they rattled off 11 straight wins, 10 of them by double digits. So it's going to be interesting to see. But that is what gives me the most pause. Is, do you come away from this game? Are we going to sit in the post-game show in the wee hours of January 2nd and talk about there was just a clear mismatch from a coaching advantage? There was, Kirby Smart was poised in a lot of the things that he decided to do. The adjustments were better on the Georgia side of the ball. Right. So what is that going to look like? Marcus Freeman has preached all year about mental and physical preparation. Is that going to hold true in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia? Or is this the next hurdle that's like, okay, we got our guys ready for the first round of the playoffs. We got them ready to finish out the regular season on a strong note. We got them ready to finish strong against USC in the Coliseum. Is this going to be it? Who knows? That's the biggest pause that I have. I'm with you.
I'm going to flip 2 and 3, Trev, because I think that my number 3 fits in really well with number 1. And that is whether it's the moment's too big or you just don't execute. Because sometimes, Trev, mentally I was fine. I wasn't overwhelmed by the moment, but I just made some mistakes that are out of what we do. But that's the other thing, too, is in this game is mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame has been a team that plays. Kirby Smart talked about it. We've talked about it. This is a Notre Dame team that since that game against Northern Illinois does not beat itself. And that's the thing about we said about Georgia as well. Georgia doesn't beat itself. If you're going to beat them, you have to outplay them. Ole Miss outplayed them. Alabama outplayed them. Tennessee could not. Texas could not. And Texas was the team that would then make the big mistakes that cost them in both games with the turnover. So it comes down to, penalties that give them first downs on third down or, fourth down offsides on a punt, running into the punter that moves the chains, turning the ball over, having a holding penalty, call back a big play. You can't have those type of mistakes from a penalty standpoint that negate big plays, whether that's the defense negating a sack because you held or you got hands to the face, a big run on offense. Like you can't do what you did against A&M.
Right.
Where you have a 37-yard run early in the game that gets called back because of a holding penalty that did not impact the play. You can't make those mistakes. You think of the Stanford game when Riley Leonard runs and he has a big old run and it gets called back because you have a hold on a play that had no impact on the play. You can't have those mistakes in this game. You think to the Louisville game last year, the big mistakes they had early, the turnover, the interception early. You're coming back in the game. You're down 17-10, or you're down. Actually, you're up 14-10. And Notre Dame what was the score at halftime of that game of Notre Dame Louisville in 2023 or 2020? Yeah, 2023. Hold on a second. I'm trying to remember what the specific score was when that happened. It was, give me a second. Because I want to set the stage properly for this. It was 7-7. That's what it was at halftime.
Gosh.
And you come out, you force a fumble on your first drive. You throw a slot fade to Chris Tyree and he drops it. So instead of it being 14-7, you drop the ball. You have to settle for a field goal. You go up 10-7. Then Louisville starts to kind of take control of the game. They're now up 17-10. You have a big, long play to Mitchell Evans that gets you deep into their territory. You're getting ready to come back. This play is going to be big for you, and you have a big pass play negated because you have hands to the face from an offensive lineman. Like those type of mistakes cannot happen in this football game. They just can't happen. And then turnovers, missed assignments. And then the final thing for me, Trevor, this Notre Dame team has been so great at capitalizing on opportunities. And they're going to have to do that again in this game. Those are the mistakes that can get you beat on the stage, whether you're Georgia, whether you're Bama, whether you're Ohio State teams that have been on the stage, or you're a team like Notre Dame or a team like Penn State who hasn't been on the stage. Those things, when it's two relatively evenly matched up teams, even if you're mentally, the moment's fine. Hey, we've been at College Field. We've played in the Coliseum. We've played on NFL stadiums. Guys, we're Notre Dame. This moment's not too big for us, and they play like it's not too big for them, meaning like it's not, they're not overwhelmed, and they're just making like Riley Leonard throwing the ball on a scramble into the middle of three guys with not another Notre Dame player on the screen, and he gets run back for a touchdown. I'm thinking of Kevin Jennings at SMU. Like that was not him making mistakes. That was the moment was too big. There's that, and then there's you're making mistakes that you don't normally do in certain games. Those two things aren't necessarily the same. They could go together, but even if the moment's not too big, you can't make those uncharacteristic mistakes. Notre Dame doesn't have up front, doesn't allow a lot of negatives, don't give up a ton of sacks. Can't allow that to happen in this game. They don't turn the ball over a whole lot. You can't turn the ball over a whole lot. You can't, you're great at forcing turnovers. You can't drop picks when you got opportunity. Early in the game, Gunnar Stockton throws the ball, hits one of the Notre Dame players right in the hands. Got to catch that ball. Those are those missed opportunities and mistakes that you need to take advantage of. If your offense gives you a short field, or if your defense gives you a short field, you need 7. Your special teams get you a short field, you need 7. It's mistakes and missed opportunities. Those things could be the difference between a 24-21 win or a 24-21 loss or anything else along those lines, Trev. That's my number 2. What's your number? What's your other one? I know the line one we'll get to, but what's your other one?
Yeah, my other one is it's kind of the daunted thing, and it's one of those where you don't really have a whole lot of control over it, but it's something that I could see playing a factor in this game, and that's another injury. And the reason why I include that is I think back to some of Notre Dame's bigger games on this stage. You think back to the 2015 Fiesta Bowl when Jalen Smith went out early with a knee injury. You think of the 2018 Clemson game, and it was a 3-3 ball game until Julian Love was ruled out, and then Trevor Lawrence and Clemson ripped off 21 straight points going against Julian Love's replacement. And with all of the injuries that this team has already battled, that is going to be one that does give me a little bit of caution. We just spent some time talking about how I do believe that it's an advantage that Notre Dame is coming off of a football game, right? That they're a rhythm-based team. They've gotten hit. They've hit, so I think that's an advantage to a certain degree because Georgia's kind of just been sitting around waiting, and they haven't had to tackle anybody or they haven't gotten hit in close to a month. The caveat to that is Notre Dame going to be slightly banged up because they haven't had enough time before they go play a physical Georgia team? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think anybody does, right? But injuries are the one thing that I think could get in the way of Notre Dame kind of overcoming this win, because there are positions on this team that are one guy away from, okay, now this is a different looking group. And I don't know what that looks like. And like I said, this one was an interesting one for me to include because it's not, you can't play scared to not get hurt because then that's how you get hurt, right? But it doesn't go into any sort of game plan. You can't game plan that way because that is how you lose football games. I just included it because in 2 of Notre Dame's previous big games like this, in recent memory, injuries changed the landscape of the game. And so that is one thing that I could see happening that just kind of, it takes the wind out of the sails, man. I saw it in 2018 Clemson. So yep. That's my number 2.
Number 3, Trev, we're on the same page on it. It's line play. If Notre Dame doesn't win or at least stalemate in the trenches, I don't think they can win this football game. It would require their quarterback to play so poorly that Notre Dame can't help but score points. Mm-hmm. You can't get whipped on the trenches on both sides of the line. You just can't. You've got to rush for at least 150 yards. You have to give Riley Leonard time to throw the football on at least 60 to 65% of his dropbacks. I'm not asking for perfection, but you've got to at least do that. The other side of the ball, you can't let Georgia establish the line of scrimmage and run the football. You can't. You can't. If they do, it's going to be hard to stop them. You can't let Gunnar Stockton sit in the pocket and be comfortable and get into any kind of rhythm and say like, hey, this isn't too big of a moment. I'm comfortable. Line play is the big thing. Now, I'm not saying Notre Dame is going to lose the line play. What I'm saying is, of all the things we talked about speed, athleticism, quarterbacks, running backs, skill players, all this, the fact of the matter is this, man. If you can't hold your own in the trenches at the very least, you are going to lose this football game. If it's a draw, then I think Notre Dame wins a close game. If you win the battle of the trenches on both sides, Notre Dame not only wins, they're going to win, again, a lot like the Louisville game. right? Where it's like they're clearly the better team. It's just, a blowout against Georgia is like what Ole Miss did. It's like 18 points, it's 17 points, 14 points, something like that. I'm not saying they're going to blow Georgia out. What I'm saying is they're going to clearly be the better team, 7 to 14 point win if Notre Dame wins the battle of the trenches on both sides. But stagnate it, and it's going to be a very, very close game. Lose the battle in trenches, and you lose the game. That's how I think this one goes. That's my final concern.
Yeah, you and I were aligned on this one, and the battle in the trenches, if Notre Dame starts to lose it, they will have to start doing things that are uncharacteristic to their identity on offense and on defense. And that does give me the most concern. On offense, I think it's pretty obvious, right? If the offensive line doesn't play well, Notre Dame will turn into a passing team if they're not able to establish an identity on the ground. And that's just not who they are.
Nope.
That's not what made them successful. As much as people want them to be, Notre Dame is a team built around running the football. And if their offensive line isn't able to do that and create lanes, like I'm not saying be 2017 Notre Dame offensive line and create holes that Chevy Silverados could drive through, just get a body on a body and give 4 and 24 or even 20 a chance with a crease. If they're not able to do that, they turn into a team that is uncharacteristic of them. And that's where they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And then on defense, I think you said everything perfectly. Just not being able to get pressure on Gunnar Stockton. You're not able to allow the linebackers to scrape over and fill gaps in the run game.
Their guards getting to the second level and banging into the linebackers. Yeah.
Gives you a lot of pause. So the line play is going to be huge.
I mean, Notre Dame's got the better backfield. They have a better quarterback. I think Georgia has a slightly better receiving core. Talent-wise, I think Notre Dame's is a little bit more consistent. But I think Georgia, I give the edge to Georgia because I think they're going to be healthy. I think Dylan Bell being healthier is going to help them out there. I think tight end, they're the better tight end room based on production, but Notre Dame talent-wise doesn't take a backseat to them. They have more experience at linebacker. Notre Dame can run with them at linebacker. Notre Dame has the better secondary. There's just a lot of areas where you say, boy, I really like where Notre Dame is. But that's going to be the game right there. But can you hold? Because in the last 2 games, you did not hold up in the trenches. Your defense did in 2019. Your defense did in 2017. The defense, both of those games, Georgia fans came and told us that Notre Dame's defensive line is going to get destroyed by Georgia, both times. And neither time did that happen. But they also said that Georgia's defensive line is going to eat up the Notre Dame offensive line. And both times that did happen. And what happened, Trev? Both games were very close, down to the wire games, and Notre Dame lost them both. Right? And that's where we're at. So if they win that battle, they win the game. I think if they lose that battle, I think they lose the game.
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to.
Agreed.
It really does. It really does. So Al Washington and Joe Rudolph are going to earn their paychecks on Wednesday, or, look, if the D-line doesn't play well, I'm not banging Al Washington. Dude's lost 3 starters, including his second-team All-American. Like, now, if Joe Rudolph's guys get dominated, we're going to have some conversations in the offseason.
Yeah.
We're going to have some conversations in the offseason. But you got to win those 2 battles. And I'll say this, if Al Washington, if the D-line does win the battle, then we're going to be talking about Al Washington needs to start getting some conversations about what his next moves need to be in regard to running his own defense.
Yeah.
Or running his own program, because the job he has done so far in overcoming all the injuries they've had and the youth they had to play. And because Jordan Patelho goes down for the season. His replacement, Boubacar Traore, who's your best pass rusher off the edge, he then goes down 2 games later. A game later, Jason Onye, who at times was your best D tackle, he's off the team 6 games into the year. Howard Cross goes down. He comes back. Then Riley goes down. That's a lot to overcome. A lot to overcome. And so far, they have. You just got to hope that this is not the game where the dam breaks.
Yeah.
That's going to be the key. So it's a big opportunity for him. And if Joe Rudolph wants to shut people like me up, then this is the game for it.
Yeah.
This is the game for it. I'll be like, hey, sorry, Joe. My bad, brother. My bad. So, yeah.
I'm
anyway.
with you.
So that's it, Trev. Hey, we got a couple super chats here before we wrap this show up. We've got one from Henry DeHarde with a super chat. Thank you, Henry. He says, guys, Superdome is 30 minutes from my house. I'll be in attendance as IB coming down. Georgia fan barked at me at the gas station. That is just weird. Like you don't see me walking up to, walking up doing something like the Irish jig or something like that at people. It's like, dude, come on, man. It's even more annoying than the people that are like, OH, I'm like, hey, great. You can spell a state that's 4 letters. Wonderful. And you spot you the first two and the first one and the last one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but Vince is actually on his way down there now. Vince will be down there covering the game this week for Irish Breakdown. So he'll be there. We are going to be at our home so we can do the post-game show, and Vince will be down there manning things and covering the game for us. So he will be down there for sure. I have a super chat from John Emerson. Thank you, John. What is your thoughts? I believe there's a better chance of Notre Dame winning by 2 touchdowns than Notre Dame losing. I would say, Trev, I do not agree with that. If you were to say, I think there's a better chance that Notre Dame wins by 2 touchdowns than they lose, period, I would disagree with that. I think there's a much better chance that Notre Dame wins by 2 touchdowns than Notre Dame loses by 2 touchdowns, which is a lot different than the last few times they've been on the stage. I would say if you were to give me that, Trev, I would agree with that statement. And that's not, even those knuckleheads at CBS Sports that were just clown themselves, they went on to then say later in the show, like, if there's a blowout in this game, it's probably Notre Dame blowing Georgia out than the other way around. But that's kind of, I would say that. I would say win by 2 touchdowns, they can do that. Would lose by 2 touchdowns, that would surprise me. That would very much surprise me. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you are, man. Would I love Notre Dame to win by 2 touchdowns? Sure, but like better chance. When it comes down to win-losses, when these teams are so similar and how they're matched, we've talked about all show long about how Notre Dame does kind of own the matchup game on paper, but I think win-loss in a close game is like relatively even. Honestly, but if we're going to talk in terms of blowing a team out, I just think the days of Notre Dame being blown out in games of this magnitude, I believe are done. I do. It also depends on what your definition of a blowout is. I guess if it's by 10 points, I guess. But I would be more surprised if Notre Dame lost by 2 touchdowns than if they won by 2 touchdowns. But just losing in general, I'm with you.
All right. These last 2 super chats, I'm just going to read them. I don't really care to engage them. Michael S., if not now, when? I fear it's not now. Don't be fooled by Kirpt being nice about Marcus Freeman Notre Dame. He's on a mission to show his talent and strength and dominance, still make him top dog. Also, Indy fight won't match the Dogs' rapid emotions. Dogs win 32-12, and we again are left waiting. Still have a great new year. You've been great all year. I do appreciate the last sentence, Michael, but I would just say, man, I feel bad that you have that much negativity. It is what it is. I feel like that's a defense mechanism. And other than that, I got nothing to say about that. So we'll see how the game plays out. We'll see. We'll see. So anyway, Trev, that is going to do it for today's show. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here?
Yeah, you got it. Guys, we are close. It's almost New Year's Day. Notre Dame is only a couple days away from kicking off against Georgia in the All-State Sugar Bowl down in New Orleans. So in order to stay in the now, make sure you like this podcast, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame as much as you do. We are still going to have some awesome content coming out. And to make sure that you see the best of it, make sure that you subscribe to the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Brian and I will be back here tomorrow to do Keys to Victory in the prediction. We will be back at 1 o'clock. So make sure that you have that notification bell hit to know when we go live.
And a reminder, Wednesday, game day, we will go live at 11 a.m. Eastern for a little pregame mailbag. So if you guys are like us and you do not want to be sitting around anxiously for waiting for the games to start, you can join us in that mailbag on Wednesday. 11 o'clock, Irish Breakdown. Be there. Be there.
Make sure you tune into all the fun stuff that we got going on. But in the meantime, New Year's Eve is coming up. You guys do plan on going out for that. Be safe, call Ubers, nobody drink and drive, but everybody have a good night and make sure that you are alive, well, and healthy for Notre Dame to take on Georgia in the All-State Sugar Bowl. So for Brian, I'm Trevor. We will see you back here next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.